Chapter 421, Departure. A luminous moon slowly ascended from the sea, laboriously climbing into the sky. Beneath the cloudless night, waves relentlessly crashed against the rocky shore. Initially, the rhythmic sound of the waves seemed soothing, but over time, it became a disturbance to one's sleep. In the lighthouse perched on a large rock, old John was already snoring loudly. Meanwhile, on the dimly lit first floor, Sirius and Atticus Blaine were still engrossed in their work. The flame from the alcohol lamp heated the crucible on the shelf. Inside the pewter crucible, a dark brown viscous solution bubbled away. Add 1/5 of an ounce of hawklap juice, Atticus instructed calmly, his eyes fixed on the potion. As the brown liquid erupted into large bubbles and then into smaller ones, he gave his order with a steady voice. Sirius, poised and ready, dashed to the square table by the window. Squinting, he rummaged through a collection of bottles and jars until he found a thumb-sized glass bottle, which he handed to Atticus. "You've given me the discharge of the bongos," Atticus remarked sternly, without looking up. "That ingredient is essential for Mrs. Skoll's all-purpose stain remover. If you're trying to poison your savior, I wouldn't mind adding a few drops, Sirius." Sirius felt momentarily flustered. He quickly withdrew the bottle and resumed his search on the table. "On your right, the light green bottle," Atticus sighed softly, offering a precise hint. With this guidance, Sirius finally located the correct bottle. After adding 1/5 of an ounce of hawklap juice, the brown solution turned dark green, releasing a puff of smoke. Just a whiff of it caused Sirius's throat to burn, and even old John, separated by a wooden wall, coughed violently in his sleep. Sirius hurriedly opened the window, allowing the acrid smoke to escape, then turned to Atticus, anxious to know if they had failed. He saw Atticus holding a wand, stirring the potion clockwise 7 times and then once counterclockwise as it shifted from dark green to light green. Sirius breathed a sigh of relief. "No failure?" he asked. "Don't make such grim jokes," Atticus replied, still focused. "If I hadn't spent so much time on spells, I wouldn't have earned the title of Master of Potions and expert on magical creatures." Sirius relaxed, shrugged, and moved to the only stool in the living room. "When I was at Hogwarts, I did well in most classes, but I never liked potions, mainly because of Professor Slughorn, who always tried to persuade me to leave Gryffindor for Slytherin." "I've heard about Professor Slughorn from Dirk Cresswell, the current head of the Goblin Liaison Office at the Ministry of Magic," Atticus said, rubbing his smoky eyes. "He seems to enjoy mingling with talented young wizards. It's very Slytherin of him." "To be fair, he's not particularly unpleasant, just a bit of a headache," Sirius complained, barely settling onto the stool before Atticus interrupted urgently. "Don't get comfortable. I need 5 porcupine quills." Porcupine quills were easier to find than hawklap juice, and this time Sirius got it right. As Atticus added the quills to the clear solution, which had already taken on a green hue, the once calm liquid began to boil again, releasing a cloud of water vapor. The potion's speed slowed, and after just half a minute only a small pool of crystal-clear liquid, reminiscent of autumn dew, remained at the bottom of the pot. Atticus Blaine waved his wand, and the liquid gracefully floated into a clean glass bottle. After extinguishing the flame, Atticus twisted his neck and finally let out a sigh of relief. "Is it done?" Sirius asked, his voice tinged with nervousness, as he gazed at the crystal liquid in the bottle, which seemed to defy gravity and float as if alive. "The leg injury that's persisted for half a century is indeed challenging to treat," Atticus replied. "Considering his age, I've adjusted the concentration of the potion. The healing process will take about 10 days, and he might not feel great during the days is time. However, after these days, his legs and some hidden injuries should be mostly healed." "Thank you," Sirius said, clutching the bottle tightly. He looked at Atticus, who was packing the bottles back into his suitcase, and offered a sincere smile. "You're even more remarkable than Professor Slughorn, Atticus. You know what I mean, right? People from that house have always been hostile to muggles, yet you're willing to spend your time brewing healing potions for an old muggle with no prior connection. Honestly, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have believed there was someone like you in Slytherin." Atticus had heard similar comments many times before, and waved his hand dismissively. "It's just for a couple of days' meals. I really enjoy Old John's hodgepodge. It's even better than what the elves make at school. Sirius smiled and said nothing more. Through the glass window, stained with oil and dust, Atticus gazed outside. In the middle of the night, the cool air caused a dense fog to rise from the coast, carried by the cold wind, gradually enveloping the small town on the open land. The moonlight became hazy, and the sea in the mist appeared somewhat mysterious. Just like before setting off for the land of Merlin's eternal rest with that woman, Atticus had a faint premonition that he might encounter some surprising things again this time. Turning his gaze back inside, Atticus watched Sirius, who was discreetly administering medicine to Old John, a slight hesitation in his eyes. Visiting Azkaban wasn't difficult for him now. He could apply to the Ministry of Magic under the guise of an academic investigation. The ministry would likely accommodate him, but they would also send personnel to accompany him, complicating matters if anything went awry. Atticus wasn't worried that Sirius would spread tales about him. Sirius was a man of loyalty, willing to endure over a decade in Azkaban for self-redemption rather than reveal the truth of his innocence. Atticus trusted him to keep the secret, but the risks of the journey were unpredictable. After giving Old John the potion and using magic to ensure the old man slept peacefully, Sirius let out a long sigh of relief. He bowed slightly to Old John, his eyes filled with gratitude. If possible, Sirius would have liked to bring Old John to live with him in London, but he never mentioned it. He knew that the sea was the final resting place for the old man's soul, and there was nowhere else Old John would go. Surveying the cluttered surroundings, Sirius grinned in the darkness. Once Harry graduated from Hogwarts and found a lifelong partner, Sirius could move here and spend the last chapter of his life with this kind old man. As he descended the creaking stairs, Sirius glanced at Atticus, who stood at the door watching him. With just one look, Sirius was taken aback. He saw deep hesitation in Atticus's gaze, which was unusual. He had known Atticus for some time, and this man had always been incredibly decisive. Atticus Blaine rarely experienced such emotions. "What's the matter, Atticus?" Sirius asked. "Nothing," Atticus replied, withdrawing his gaze and pursing his lips. "It's just that you know my trip to Azkaban isn't about making things difficult for the Dementors or the prisoners. I'm pursuing something, and it might be risky." Sirius suddenly smiled, a knowing grin spreading across his face. "Are you worried about involving me?" "Indeed," Atticus admitted calmly. "I don't want to deceive you, Sirius. I can't predict what we'll encounter, but I can assure you that if we face danger, neither I nor Dumbledore will be able to control the situation. Harry has finally found a relative. If something happens to you, it might devastate him." "Yeah, it would definitely be a blow," Sirius acknowledged, still smiling as if he weren't discussing his own fate. "But I believe in him. Harry is as brave as his father. Even if something happens to me, Harry will face life courageously. And Sirius's smile turned mischievous, momentarily shedding the years to reveal the confident youth he once was. "It's my inescapable duty to care for Harry, Atticus, but if that's all I have to do for the rest of my life, I might as well die at sea." As the early morning light dimmed the lighthouse's glow, Atticus used magic to expand and tidy the rusty cabin. They would spend at least 2 weeks on the fishing boat Old John had given them, and without magical enhancements, it wouldn't be a pleasant journey. Facing the cool sea breeze, Sirius lifted his head to the dim, starry sky, a smile playing on his lips. "When can we leave, Atticus? I can't wait to embark on this adventure. It reminds me of exploring the Forbidden Forest with James and Remus back in the day." Atticus poked his head out of the cabin, covered in dust and looking exasperated. "If you're willing to come in and help, we can leave sooner." "Oh," Sirius said, spreading his hands with an innocent expression. "I'm not very good at preparations. That was always the job of that traitor Peter." End of this chapter. Chapter 422, A Discontented Summer Vacation. In the evening, the afterglow of the setting sun stretched across the mountains and seas, casting a warm pink hue on the white walls of No. 4 Privet Drive. The light filtered through the curtains of a second-floor window, painting the dark room with a soft, rosy glow. Dinner was still some time away, and the neighbors on Privet Drive were busy tending to their lawns and gardens. Children played on the spacious street, chasing each other or a stray dog, their laughter ringing like silver bells in the tranquil air. Through a gap in the curtains, Harry watched the children, their joy evident under the watchful eyes of their parents. After a while, he sighed deeply, flopped onto his bed, and pulled the quilt over his head. The room, bathed in a blush of sunset, was messier than usual, cluttered with items uncommon in a typical Muggle child's room. At the foot of the bed lay a large wooden chest, its lid open to reveal a cauldron, broomstick, black robe, and various spellbooks. On the table stood an empty cage, where Harry's white owl, Hedwig, usually perched. Rolls of parchment were scattered across the table, and on the floor opposite the bed lay an open book, its pages filled with moving pictures of young men in bright orange robes on broomsticks, tossing a red ball to one another. Indeed, an apprentice wizard resided at number 4 Privet Drive. If the neighbors discovered that the seemingly ordinary Dursleys harbored a freak, they would be astounded, and the Dursleys themselves would be mortified enough to consider moving overnight. Harry, however, was indifferent to such concerns. He hadn't chosen to return here. Nearly a month ago, he had been compelled to spend another summer with the Dursleys. To be honest, this was probably the most unpleasant time of the year for him, and he couldn't quite determine if things had improved or worsened this year. In the past, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia would never allow him to engage with anything magical during the summer. As soon as he returned home, they would lock away all his Hogwarts-related belongings, only reluctantly returning them when school resumed. This year, however, things were different, thanks to Professor Atticus Blaine and Sirius. Their conversation, before the summer, had significantly altered the Dursleys' behavior. They had ceased their abuse, at least materially. Aunt Petunia no longer forced him to rise early to prepare breakfast for the family, nor did she leave him to wash dishes alone while the Dursleys lounged on the couch watching TV. Uncle Vernon no longer yelled at him about his hair, and Dudley had stopped tripping him on the stairs for amusement. This summer, Harry experienced an unprecedented level of freedom. He was exempt from housework and enjoyed meals that even Dudley, who was on a diet, couldn't have. The only issue was that the Dursleys acted as if he didn't exist. Previously, they would only pretend to outsiders that he wasn't part of the household. Now, they barely spoke to him throughout the summer. Aunt Petunia would collect his dirty clothes while he was out, and if he missed a meal, Uncle Vernon would leave a plate at his door, knocking before departing. Dudley, on the other hand, would avoid him entirely, no matter what he was doing. Whenever the topic of his past came up, Atticus Blaine would fall silent, pretending as if nothing had happened. He wished the Dursleys had treated him this way before. Yet, now that he was experiencing this kind of treatment, he had to admit he missed the past a little. At least back then, he felt like he existed. He wrote to Ron and Hermione about his feelings, and as expected, they were outraged. Ron replied, saying he would inform his father and have Mr. Weasley take Atticus away from the Dursleys immediately. Atticus's heart skipped a beat at the thought, but after careful consideration, he declined Ron's offer. It wasn't because the Weasleys weren't good to him. In fact, if he could have parents like Ron's, Atticus would trade everything he had. The issue was that he now had a relative, Sirius Black, his godfather. Sirius had promised to pick him up from the Dursleys as soon as he had taken care of a few things. Atticus thought it best not to leave without permission, and he didn't want to hear Mrs. Weasley, who knew his situation, complaining in the kitchen that Sirius hadn't done his job. Speaking of Sirius, Atticus sighed heavily under the quilt. In the first few days of summer vacation, Sirius had sent him 2 replies, explaining that he was dealing with certain matters with Professor Blaine. If all went well, he would be back in 2 weeks at the latest. But now, there was no news at all. All the letters Atticus sent with Hedwig were returned, meaning she couldn't find Sirius. This was unusual, as Hedwig was a clever owl who always managed to complete her tasks for Atticus. Her repeated failures made him worry about Sirius and Professor Blaine's safety. Hermione suggested that Atticus write to Dumbledore to explain the situation, but he hesitated. On one hand, he thought Sirius and Professor Blaine might have just traveled too far for Hedwig to find them, and writing to Dumbledore felt like overreacting. On the other hand, Ron's perspective made sense. If Sirius and Professor Blaine couldn't handle the problem, perhaps even Dumbledore couldn't help. Suddenly, a loud slam of the door downstairs startled Atticus, who had been listening intently for any sign of trouble. He jumped out of bed and rushed out of his room, taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach the silent first floor. Ignoring the steaming dinner on the dining table, he stood alone in the gloomy living room. It was clear the Dursleys had gone out. In the past, they would often leave him at home, but at least they would warn him not to turn on the TV, raid the fridge, or enter their rooms. Now, they had left without a word, though they had thoughtfully prepared his dinner. Atticus suddenly noticed a note on the coffee table. He leaped over the sofa to grab it. It was a message from Aunt Petunia. "Maggie came to visit us to see Dudley. We took her out to eat. We thought you didn't like her, so we didn't invite you. Your dinner is on the table. Leave the dirty dishes. We'll deal with them when we get back." "Curse them," Atticus muttered, his face livid. He fought the urge to pull out his wand and set the house ablaze, crumpling the note and throwing it to the ground in frustration. "Certainly. Please provide the text you would like me to improve." Chapter 423, Harry's Dreamland Boom. 5 minutes later, Harry was back in his room. Facing the full-length mirror mounted on the wardrobe, he saw a dejected face staring back at him. Harry had to admit he had oversimplified things. He thought that Sirius's warning would make life more bearable with the Dursleys. So when Sirius proposed the plan, Harry didn't refuse. Now it seemed that Sirius's warning was surprisingly effective, but not in the way Harry had hoped. Frustrated, Harry kicked open the boxes at the foot of his bed and buried his head in the covers. He had overestimated himself, hadn't he? He had been looking forward to staying with the Dursleys, but after just one day, he realized he'd rather be scolded than spend a summer vacation with them. Suddenly, Harry started thrashing on the bed, hammering the bedboard like a madman and making strange noises. The best solution would be for Sirius to appear immediately and take him away from this house. That would solve the immediate problem, but there were still 2 more summer vacations to endure. According to Sirius, until he graduated from Hogwarts, he had to return to the Dursleys' house for a while during the summer. Or should he apologize to the Dursleys and tell them that Sirius was just playing a nasty joke and that he wasn't guilty at all? Harry rubbed his face against the sheet, trying to force the thought out of his mind. Reconcile with the Dursleys? Just the thought of it made him feel humiliated enough. When Hedwig returned, he would write a letter to Ron, asking Mr. Weasley to get him out of the house sooner. Ron had always suggested this, but Harry felt he should honor his agreement with Sirius, so he had resisted the tempting offer. As the sun set, the pink halo that filled the room gradually faded, and darkness crept in from the corners, quietly enveloping the room. Harry had no appetite. He tossed and turned on the bed for a long time until he finally lost consciousness. During that time, he thought he heard the Dursleys opening the door, but he was too exhausted to get up and check. He vaguely wondered if he should leave the Dursleys early, as it seemed they would have preferred him gone immediately. When the crescent moon hung high, the irritation on Harry's face disappeared, along with his inner turmoil. Suddenly, he heard indistinct voices in his ears, voices that were clearly not from the Dursleys. Moreover, there were fleeting images before his eyes, strange pictures. Was he dreaming? With only a sliver of reason left, Harry pondered this, feeling an inexplicable urgency to understand what those flickering images meant. Astonishingly, as he focused on this thought, the images became clearer, though they still wavered. Seeking to pass the time, Harry concentrated on the pictures, and his consciousness began to sink. To tell the truth, Frank Bryce of Little Hangleton and Old John of Shetland really looked alike. Both were veterans who had survived a cruel war, and both had suffered bodily trauma. One had spent his life guarding the once prosperous Riddle House, while the other remained at a forgotten lighthouse. Moreover, their fates changed in July of '94. The weather had been fine these days, but the moisture in the soil still made Frank's bad leg protest in the middle of the night. Aged and frail, Frank had struggled with his bad leg for half his life and knew how to handle the situation. Patience was essential. He had to do something. The bright moonlight shone through the old window sash into the decaying kitchen. Frank didn't find the scene beautiful. Instead, he felt the moonlight was unusually bright, causing Atticus Blaine's eyes to squint uncomfortably as they adjusted from the darkness. Groaning softly, he rubbed his eyes and rose from his bed, his bare feet touching the cold floor. Atticus limped downstairs, into the kitchen, seeking to fill a hot water bottle to soothe his stiff knees. As he stood by the sink, filling the pot with water, his gaze drifted instinctively to the Riddle Mansion, a place he had watched over for half his life. The mansion's second floor was bathed in moonlight, appearing lonely and desolate. The windows shimmered, and Atticus immediately suspected that the mischievous boys from the village were up to their usual antics, trying to cause trouble. Though he hadn't entered the mansion in years, Atticus remembered its layout vividly. He slipped through the back door into the dark cave-like kitchen, moving as quietly as possible to catch the intruders by surprise. He imagined those boys, much like the villagers who had once accused him of madness, were up to no good. The large French windows flanking the front door allowed some light into the decaying corridor, guiding him up the dusty stone steps to the second floor. On the landing, Atticus turned right and quickly identified the source of the disturbance. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, with flickering light spilling through the crack, casting an orange-yellow glow on the dark floor. Atticus approached cautiously, gripping his crutch tightly, ready to confront the boys. A few steps from the door, he peered through the narrow gap and saw the flickering light came from a fire in the fireplace. This surprised him, as the villagers rarely used the fireplace at this time of year. He paused, listening intently, and heard a clear, melodious voice emanating from the room. Despite its calmness, Atticus detected a hint of restrained disdain, a nuance only a lifetime of experience could discern. "Drink it quickly, Mr. Dark Lord. It won't last long." "Ah, thank you so much," replied a man, his voice unnaturally high-pitched and devoid of genuine gratitude, as cold and biting as a winter wind. Atticus forgot about the troublemakers, drawn in by the conversation. He edged closer to the door, hearing a rhythmic thud, thump, thump, a sound that reminded him of celebrating with comrades after surviving a grueling battle. "Wonderful. Every time I feel wonderful," the man continued, seemingly admiring his drink. Yet, to Atticus, the voice was like the hiss of a venomous snake, sending a shiver down his spine. "I never thought there was such marvelous vitality hidden in the vegetation people overlook, comparable to unicorn blood. Ah, it seems I've indeed overlooked much in the past, and I've paid a terrible price." Unicorn blood? Atticus's gray eyebrows furrowed in confusion, thinking he must have misheard. He strained to listen more closely, but the room fell silent, the owner of the clear voice seemingly uninterested in the man's admiration. Peering through the door crack, Atticus saw only a shadow on the wall, likely belonging to a woman, while the man sat in a high-backed chair facing the fireplace, his face obscured. "Could you please feed the rest of these to Nagini? I think he must be hungry after the bumpy journey, just like me." "Ah, of course. Of course, I'm not accusing you of not caring enough. However, I believe you must be well aware that I am not the same as I once was." End of this chapter. Chapter 424, New Destiny. The young lady in the room remained silent, creating a brief pause in the conversation. "You are recovering well, Mr. Dark Lord. If you choose to stay in the forest, you might regain your health in no time," a voice remarked. Frank was taken aback by this revelation. Someone actually called themselves the Dark Lord? What kind of person would adopt such an ominous nickname? Frank had a gut feeling that he had stumbled into a peculiar situation. The people in the house before him might not be the law-abiding citizens they appeared to be. Healthy body, yes, indeed. The man referred to as the Dark Lord spoke with a mix of emotions, finally revealing some semblance of normalcy. "I must admit, I never imagined I'd have to go about it this way. It's remarkable to think I can restore my original powers with patience, but—" His voice suddenly turned cold. "You know as well as I do, Miss Corona, that the forest is no longer safe. The Ministry of Magic could appear at any moment." "Ah, I trust you, Miss Corona. Those mobs are no match for you, but until I regain my full power, it would be wise for us to keep a low profile." "If you hadn't insisted on killing that woman, Bertha Jorkins," Frank could hear the anger in the voice of the woman, now identified as Corona. What alarmed Frank more was the mention of a murder. A woman named Bertha Jorkins had been killed. A homicide. Blood surged through Frank's old veins, and his head buzzed with confusion. Dealing with memories is not difficult for wizards, nor for us, but you still insisted on killing her. I don't mean to criticize your methods, Mr. Dark Lord, but your actions have undoubtedly put us in danger. The tension in the room was palpable, and Frank almost expected the pair of murderers to start arguing. Another uncomfortable silence ensued, just as Frank decided to leave the old house and warn the villagers. The man, who had been facing away from him, spoke again. Altering memories. Yes, you did suggest that, Miss Corona, but I recall explaining to you. The Dark Lord's voice was icy. Changing memory is not a foolproof method. If confronted by a powerful wizard, the forgetting curse can fail. This was confirmed during my interrogation of her, wasn't it? The more Frank listened, the more bewildered he became. The cold voice continued, but the tone softened slightly. We are allies who have built mutual trust, aren't we, Miss Corona? You followed your ancestors' guidance to find me, hoping I would help you out of your predicament. But in my current state, I have no one to rely on but you. We are allies who support each other, so we should be honest. You still disagree with the plan I intend to implement to regain my strength, don't you? The young lady's voice remained absent, leaving the Dark Lord to speak to himself. I have my reasons for using that boy. I have expressed my firm determination to you, Miss Corona. I will not use anyone else. I have waited 13 years, and I can wait a few more months. It doesn't matter. As for the boy's close protection, I am confident my plan will succeed. By then, I will be flawless, and you will see the end of many centuries of wandering. The woman in the room was none other than Atticus Blaine, who had been searching for a year without any news, the contemporary priest of the Druids, Vitia Creona. Compared to a year ago, Vitia hadn't changed much. However, when facing the notorious Dark Lord of the wizarding world, her gentle and serene demeanor vanished, and her emerald eyes remained vigilant. Even without wind, her slightly floating emerald green hair indicated that her power was always ready to be unleashed. Mr. Dark Lord. Vitia lowered her gaze, avoiding eye contact. The monster lay curled up on the chair. Over the past year, she had often regretted her impulsive decisions, even though they were guided by the two snake staff and the instructions of her ancestors. If a druid had to rely on a wizard's power to escape a predicament, there were many candidates to choose from, but she had undoubtedly chosen the worst one. We are not wizards, but we know what Harry Potter means to the wizarding world. You want to use him, even at the risk of angering Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore is just an old fool. He's long gone. Even Frank, who understood little, could sense that the Dark Lord seemed somewhat afraid of Albus Dumbledore, and his retort was laced with humiliation. The faint firelight in the fireplace cast a glow on Vitia's fair cheeks, creating a beautiful silhouette on the moth-eaten wooden floor riddled with holes. The Dark Lord, or rather Voldemort, was certainly not a wizard that a druid who revered life and nature would admire, yet fate had brought them together. Even so, Vitia knew she couldn't persuade the evil wizard before her, but she still hoped he could retain some semblance of sanity. Her slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and her voice was weary. Hogwarts has more than just Albus Dumbledore. Aside from the figure before her, who had desecrated life and become a devil and monster, the wizard who had accompanied her to the island of Avalon was the most powerful and dangerous wizard Vitia had ever encountered. To this day, she couldn't forget the man's eyes in the temple at the center of the island, after she had obtained the double snake staff, which filled her with trembling anger. Atticus Blaine. His reputation had once shone only in the underground world of wizards, but recently it had begun to spread to the wider world. Head of Student Safety at Hogwarts, Atticus Blaine. Mr. Dark Lord, you read the wizard's newspaper. He may be more dangerous. If the Dark Lord feared Albus Dumbledore, then Vitia did her utmost to avoid crossing paths with Atticus Blaine again. Yet she knew in her heart that since she had chosen to follow the prophecy left by her ancestors, this day would inevitably come. Atticus Blaine, oh, the young man who killed Greyback. The Dark Lord was clearly amused, speaking with a mocking tone. Yes, yes, the prophet said he killed Fenrir and many of his men single-handedly, but Miss Corona, this is not a difficult task. If you ask me, it's quite easy for you, isn't it? Why should we worry about a clown being promoted by Dumbledore? Vitya's bright eyes flickered, and she remained silent. Voldemort knew he hadn't convinced the young woman, but he didn't care as long as she obeyed his orders. Her defiance of the great Dark Lord would be punished accordingly once he regained his full power. Of course, he wouldn't kill her. After all, the Dark Lord rewarded those who aided him. Once she fully submitted, and the wizarding world was under his control, he would help Vitya Corona eliminate the forces that persecuted them. After all, the Holy See held considerable prestige in the Muggle world, and destroying this power would make Muggles more acutely aware of Voldemort's greatness. A fleeting thought crossed Voldemort's mind, and he smiled coldly. I think I've convinced you, haven't I, Miss Corona? Now, before we proceed, let's entertain tonight's mystery guest. Mystery guest? Frank's head spun for a moment, and in the next instant, many things happened. He finally saw the creature emerge from behind the high-backed soft chair. What kind of monster was that? The strong visual impact made Frank's eyes go dark with fear. Nagini, don't! Stop hurting innocent lives! The two voices rang out almost simultaneously, their urgency piercing the air. A vivid green glow and a somber green light seeped through his drooping eyelids. Frank had no time to ponder the peculiar words he heard before he completely lost consciousness. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, in the quiet bedroom of No. 4 Privet Drive, Atticus Blaine awoke from his dream, a cold sweat glistening on his forehead. End of this chapter. Chapter 25, The Storm is Coming. Atticus Blaine lay flat on his bed, panting heavily, as if he had just completed a grueling half-hour run in gym class. He had awoken from a vivid dream, his hands pressed tightly against his face. Beneath his fingers, the lightning-shaped scar throbbed painfully, as if a white-hot wire had been pressed against his skin. He sat up, covering the scar with one hand while rubbing his eyes with the other, trying to clear the remnants of sleep. He reached for his glasses, and as he put them on, the room slowly came into focus. Judging by the angle of the moonlight filtering through the curtains, it was well past midnight. Listening intently, Atticus confirmed that the Dursleys had returned. Dudley's thunderous snoring was unmistakable. Atticus ran his fingers over the scar again. It still hurt intensely. He switched on the desk lamp beside him, noticing that Hedwig, who had gone out for a nighttime hunt, had returned. The owl was now sleeping soundly in her cage. Atticus observed that Hedwig's talons were empty and the table was bare, indicating that she had not received a reply from Sirius. After a moment of silence, he pushed aside the small pang of disappointment and tried to recall the dream. Everything had felt so real, as if he were truly there. A dimly lit room had appeared before him, and he had heard Voldemort's voice. Though he hadn't heard it in 2 years, Atticus remembered it vividly. Voldemort had taken form, and Atticus felt a chill slide into his stomach. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to recall Voldemort's appearance in the dream, but it eluded him. All he knew was that when Voldemort's chair turned and his eyes fell upon it, he was gripped by an overwhelming fear, which jolted him awake. Perhaps it was the sudden, sharp pain in his scar. There had been a young woman in the room. Atticus couldn't identify her, but her name and face were like fine sand slipping through his fingers. The more he tried to grasp them, the faster they vanished. In the end, he could only vaguely recall that she had an exceptional appearance and a serene demeanor. How peculiar! If the dream had truly revealed something, how could such a woman be involved with Voldemort? And then there was the old man. His presence in the dream was fleeting, and Atticus only saw him collapse in a flash of green light. If the old man had encountered the real Voldemort, Atticus could almost be certain of his fate. There had been a conversation in the dream, but Atticus couldn't remember it clearly. He only recalled that his name seemed to be mentioned and that Voldemort appeared to be plotting something against him. It wasn't hard to guess. Besides wanting him dead, what other plans could Voldemort have? So, was what he saw real or just a figment of his imagination? Atticus stood up from the bed. He drew back the curtains and gazed down at the clean, quiet street, bathed in the dim yellow glow of the street lamps. He gently stroked the scar with his fingers. The last time the scar had flared up was when Voldemort was nearby, and this thought unsettled Atticus. His vigilant eyes scanned the street. Could Voldemort be lurking on Privet Drive? The idea seemed absurd, utterly impossible. Now was the time to seriously consider his next move. Even if Atticus didn't want to appear weak or overly concerned, he knew that anything involving Voldemort should not be taken lightly. He paced the room, eyes half closed, contemplating a plan. It was still the end of July, with a month to go before school started. If he waited until then to reveal the truth, nothing might change. But who should he tell? On the table lay 2 birthday cards, one from Hermione and Ron had sent his message ahead of time, even though his birthday was still a few days away. What advice would Hermione give? Your scar hurts? Harry, that's not something to take lightly. Write to Dumbledore or Professor Blaine. They'll be able to offer some insight. I'll look up common magical wounds now. Maybe the book will mention enchanted scars. Yes, Hermione I'll definitely suggest that. And Harry could almost mimic Hermione's earnest tone. But truthfully, Harry doubted the book could provide a clear explanation for why his scar hurt, especially since the connection between him and Voldemort was unclear even to those involved. The thought of telling Professor Dumbledore lingered in Harry's mind for a moment before he dismissed it. It seemed too absurd to bother the headmaster of Hogwarts over a mere scar pain, even if Dumbledore was someone he trusted. What about Professor Blaine? Harry was certain that Professor Blaine wouldn't dismiss his letter or accuse him of overreacting. However, he was reluctant to write to him. Last summer, a letter from Harry had brought Professor Blaine to Privet Drive, where they both witnessed the death of Professor Blaine's father. Harry didn't want to burden Professor Blaine with more troubles every summer. That left Sirius. As his godfather and an experienced adult wizard, Sirius was the best person to consult. Harry sat at the table, looking pensive. Sirius genuinely cared about him, and he was with Professor Blaine. If Sirius couldn't provide an answer, he could always seek advice from the knowledgeable Professor Blaine. The only problem was that both Sirius and Professor Blaine were missing, and Hedwig couldn't find any trace of Sirius. Late at night, Harry, with a focused expression, worked at his desk for a long time. Finally, he picked up his quill and scribbled a few lines on a piece of parchment. It's never pleasant to be woken up, whether you're human or bird. Hedwig pecked Harry's finger in protest, her eyes full of reproach. Sorry, Hedwig, Harry said apologetically. I'm sorry to disturb your rest, but this is urgent. It's a letter to Sirius. Hedwig tilted her head, cooing softly. Do your best, Hedwig, Harry sighed. Try as hard as you can to find him. If you can't, come back quickly. There's another letter for Ron. If Sirius isn't around for a while, I hope to move to the burrow as soon as possible. As the white silhouette of Hedwig disappeared into the night, Harry sighed and muttered, We must find him. Meanwhile, the deep ocean lay calm, a true reflection of tranquility. Without the pollution of Muggle technology, the mysterious starry sky revealed its wonders to Atticus Blaine and Sirius on the deck. The bright starlight scattered across the undulating sea, painting the waters with a celestial glow. This marked the last day of their 3rd week at sea. As expected, the journey to find Azkaban was fraught with challenges. They lacked specific coordinates for the island, relying only on vague memories. The initial excitement of their departure had long been dulled by the monotonous sound of waves. Every night, as the stars emerged, Sirius stayed up, frowning at the sky. In contrast, Atticus remained calm, treating the journey like a vacation. During the day, he read in the cabin or pondered quietly, and in the evening, he emerged to enjoy the cool sea breeze and fish leisurely. Occasionally, they encountered unexpected situations. In one instance, some deep-sea creatures discovered that their haunting songs failed to lure human fishing boats that had wandered into their territory. Frustrated, they summoned their kin, encircling the vessels and attempting to pierce the cabins with their bizarrely shaped bone forks, intending to bury the humans beneath the waves. However, it was certainly not Atticus Blaine and Sirius who met their end in the belly of the sea. How long have we been out here? Sirius asked, his eyes scanning the sea, illuminated by the bright moonlight and starlight. He squinted, searching for a landmark to confirm they weren't off course. After a prolonged silence, he pursed his salty lips, a hint of frustration in his voice. Sirius had anticipated a challenging journey, expecting they would drift at sea for an extended period. Yet, they had lost more time than he had foreseen. Before the summer break, Sirius had promised Harry he would rescue him from the Muggle couple's house as soon as possible. Now, they hadn't even glimpsed the shadow of Azkaban. 21 days, replied Atticus, reclining on the deck and gazing at the endless night sky. His answer made Sirius's heart sink. Harry's birthday was approaching, his first since escaping Azkaban. Sirius had planned a celebration for him, but now it seemed that plan was doomed to fail. The night remained clear and cloudless, yet the air's humidity steadily increased. Sirius, who had become something of a navigation expert, immediately sensed an impending storm. This was a common occurrence at sea. Everything could seem normal one moment, only to be engulfed in a torrential downpour the next. "Let's head back to the cabin, Atticus," Sirius said, shaking his head in disappointment. "I haven't found any new clues, and it's going to rain soon. I hope old John's boat can withstand the storm." With that, Sirius leapt off the bow's guardrail and headed towards the cabin. As he passed Atticus, who had stood up, he noticed his companion was still scanning the sea, seemingly reluctant to seek shelter from the rain. "What's the matter, Atticus?" Sirius asked. After more than 20 days at sea, the two had discussed many topics. Now, they spoke in a concise and straightforward manner, having exhausted their desire for conversation. Staring at the waves, Atticus appeared perplexed. "It's not great," he admitted, "just something feels off." End of this chapter. Chapter 426, The Power of Heaven and Earth. The sea was anything but calm. Instead of gentle breezes and light rain, there were fierce winds and tumultuous waves that seemed to carve holes in the ocean's surface. Atticus Blaine and Sirius had been at sea for nearly a month, enduring severe weather multiple times. Yet each time they emerged unscathed, thanks to the protective magic surrounding them. As the ship tilted more dramatically under the bright starry sky, Sirius remained unfazed. In contrast, Atticus stood at the cabin door, gazing at the chaotic world outside with a solemn expression. "What's going on, Atticus?" Sirius asked, holding a glass of red currant rum. He staggered out of the kitchen, following the ship's swaying motion, and noticed Atticus leaning against the doorframe, frowning at the relentless sea. The dark clouds hung low, almost within reach. Atticus squinted, his eyes reflecting a purple gleam in the darkness as he focused on the swirling black clouds above. Among them, lightning snaked through the sky, and his grip on the doorframe tightened, veins bulging in his hands. "It's just rain, nothing to worry about," Sirius said, trying to reassure Atticus. He noticed the concern in Atticus's eyes and shrugged. "It's not just that," Atticus replied cautiously. "The magic is shifting with the natural environment. This flow might not seem abnormal, but I have a bad feeling." Those who knew Atticus understood that he didn't make such statements lightly. Hearing his concern, Sirius lowered his glass and wiped the corner of his mouth, stained red from the rum. After a moment of thought, he looked outside and hesitantly said, "Could it be like when I left the waters near Azkaban? I encountered a storm then, and survived by drifting with the current." "I've read that there are certain defensive measures around Azkaban," Atticus explained succinctly. "These defenses are ancient, not created by the Ministry of Magic, but seem to have always existed, like natural barriers that can't be breached. That's why the Ministry feels secure detaining dangerous criminals there. But how did the Ministry bypass those barriers?" The rain intensified, and the raindrops pounded the deck like hundreds of fists hammering the cabin. "Maybe you're overthinking it, Atticus," Sirius said, though his expression had turned grim. "Even if there's some magic around Azkaban, it shouldn't be insurmountable. Otherwise, how did I escape back then?" His spirits lifted slightly as he stared at the massive waves. "If we're really within the magical defenses, Atticus, it means we're close to Azkaban, doesn't it? I've been worried we took the wrong path." "It's too soon to celebrate," Atticus replied, clutching his wand with a serious tone. "This storm isn't natural. There are signs of manipulation. However, the convergence and divergence of magic are normal. A more advanced force is resisting our approach. Just because you escaped Azkaban doesn't mean we can invade from the outside. Sirius, perhaps you were just lucky last time." Sirius wanted to argue, but Clang! The hurricane propelled their boat forward, and suddenly a massive wave crashed against them, lifting the rusty vessel to the height of a 4- or 5-story building. Force! Atticus Blaine's complexion changed drastically as he pointed his wand out of the boat. A screen of purple light flowed from the wand's tip like water. This shimmering barrier rapidly spread across the ship's walls, enveloping it in a protective purple coat. The magic barrier held the cabin suspended in midair, hovering above the tumultuous sea. Crack! The sea, seemingly enraged by its failure to dismantle the cabin, roared with fury. Thunder flickered and danced violently within the leaden clouds, reminiscent of a mythological god of thunder wielding a whip. The lightning, thick and powerful, illuminated the world before crashing down upon the ship with relentless force. "Get out of the way!" Sirius shouted hoarsely. Hum! Atticus swiftly twirled his wand, maneuvering the ship to narrowly dodge the onslaught of thunderbolts. The lightning struck the sea, transforming it into a churning cauldron of electric fury. Shattered electric lights darted across the surface like fish, casting a blue glow over the stormy sea. Though they had evaded this immediate threat, Atticus and Sirius wore expressions of grave concern. With the aid of the lightning, Sirius finally comprehended the surreal scene before him. They appeared to be amidst an endless mountain range, with colossal waves forming the peaks and valleys beneath them. The world trembled slightly, and the air was thick with the ominous sense of impending doom. Cold sweat mingled with rain on Sirius's face as he shouted, "Are you kidding me, Atticus? Did you foresee this happening?" The magic barrier shielding the cabin was battered not only by stray thunderbolts, but also by the relentless storm and an inexplicable, suffocating force that Sirius couldn't perceive. Yet Atticus, who maintained the barrier, felt it acutely. The storm's reach seemed boundless. Sirius couldn't fathom the idea that a wizard could conjure such chaos, except perhaps the legendary Merlin himself. "The worst is yet to come," Atticus panted slightly, speaking with a calm resolve. The existence of Avalon Island showcased the formidable power of ancient legendary wizards. Sirius was right. Atticus had anticipated encountering significant challenges on this journey. However, the magnitude of this storm still took him by surprise. The pervasive pressure surrounding them wasn't just from raw magical power, but from a higher, more profound force, the coercion of soul power. Sirius was utterly stunned, rendered speechless by the revelation. Atticus, sensing the growing pressure, attempted to steer the boat in a specific direction. Yet, as they advanced, the pressure intensified, and fear crept into his heart. It felt as though an ancient beast lay in wait, ready to devour them. "There's an old teapot on the table in my room. It's a portkey," Atticus said, as another thunderbolt struck the deck, causing the barrier to shudder violently. The fishing boat beneath it groaned under the strain. Atticus turned to Sirius, who was drenched in cold sweat, and spoke calmly. "I made that portkey at Old John's. It can take you back." "What do you mean, Atticus?" Sirius was momentarily stunned before regaining his composure. He frowned, his eyes blazing with determination. "You want me to run away? That's not my style, Atticus." "The reason I brought you here—" Atticus Blaine sighed inwardly, then spoke with calm determination. "It seems I've arrived at the destination, Sirius. From here on, it's a personal matter, and I prefer to handle it alone. I don't want anyone else involved, so—" "Oh, what a clumsy lie!" Sirius interrupted, his voice laced with frustration. "You intend to face the danger alone, leaving me behind?" "Absolutely not, Atticus. Since I brought you here, it's my responsibility to ensure you return safely." End of this chapter. Chapter 427. Roaring Atticus Blaine rolled his eyes, feeling quite exasperated. "Think about Harry, Sirius. He's still waiting for you. At the very least, you need to live until he comes of age, right?" "I've already explained that." Sirius gripped the doorframe and roared. "Besides, I can't leave you here alone. Harry cares about you a lot. If you die here, and I sneak away, I'd be ashamed to face Harry and Remus again." Atticus wanted to say more, but before he could, his expression changed suddenly. He managed to say, "Stay in the cabin," to Sirius, then waved his wand to shut the cabin door firmly. In the next moment, his figure seemed to dissolve into a ghostly apparition, reappearing atop the boat. Looking up at the swirling clouds, Atticus let out a heavy breath. The scene before him was beyond belief. Even though he had witnessed Avalon Island floating high in the sky, the apocalyptic vision now unfolding was indescribable. It surpassed the limits of human capability and ventured into the realm of the unimaginable. The sea before him boiled like a cauldron of oil. With each flicker of lightning, the changes ahead made Atticus's face darken with concern. The scattered hurricanes in the sky and on the earth gradually converged into a tornado drawn by some mysterious force. On the turbulent sea surface, vortices appeared one after another, reminiscent of the Charybdis from Greek mythology. These whirlpools, stretching 20 or 30 miles across, erupted with astonishing suction, continuously swallowing vast amounts of seawater and air. Even the dark clouds above were affected by this immense force. The rain-laden clouds were pulled down from the sky, connecting with the sea's vortices, while lightning bolts struck the towering water columns. "It's a bit exaggerated," Atticus muttered. The air was frigid, and the hot breath he exhaled left white vapor trails in the wind, yet his cheeks flushed with excitement. The illusionary magic that clouded his vision dissipated, and the light in his pure purple eyes intensified. Whoever had orchestrated this spectacle, be it Merlin or the island's original owner, had done so with incredible magic or a powerful magical circle. Atticus, seeking a breakthrough, couldn't pass up the chance to confront such formidable, ancient magic. From a distance, several jets of water pierced the sky and earth. Sirius, with his cheek pressed against the cabin window, was left speechless, his expression dazed as if he were dreaming. "Voldemort," he muttered suddenly, then shook his head. Voldemort, who had instilled fear and nightmares in the wizarding world and countless wizarding families, undoubtedly possessed unmatched power. Yet even Voldemort's might seemed insignificant against such natural majesty. Sirius felt his own insignificance, but quickly snapped back to reality. Now was not the time for such thoughts. "How are you, Atticus?" Sirius called out, locked in the cabin and unable to see Atticus on the ship's roof. "Come down, Atticus. Use the port key to get out while you can. Don't be reckless. No one can handle that." Atticus was undoubtedly the most powerful wizard Sirius had ever encountered, aside from Dumbledore. However, Atticus was still young, and young people often had a competitive spirit. Sirius feared that Atticus's determination might lead him into danger. Atticus Blaine was overwhelmed by his own determination to lose, believing he could withstand the wrath of nature. Despite his worries, he continued to send reminders, but received no response. Just as Sirius could no longer bear the tension and was about to draw his wand to destroy the cage, a violent tremor knocked him to the ground. Before he could rise from the wet, cold floor, a sudden sensation of weightlessness made Sirius's heart race. He quickly glanced out the window. After many years, the world had finally found peace. To celebrate the victory of the battle that saved two worlds, the Daily Prophet sent reporters to interview some of the survivors who had participated in that monumental conflict. Sirius Black, who was the head of Hogwarts and Gryffindor House at the time, was naturally included in the interviews. When a young reporter faced the legendary Sirius Black and asked him about the most thrilling scene he had ever witnessed, the reporter expected Dean Black to recount the Great War. To his surprise, Mr. Black, whose beard and hair had turned gray, laughed and shared a different, lesser-known tale, the story of his adventures with the Holy One, Atticus Blaine. A deafening roar echoed through the void, a sound akin to the cries of gods and demons, overpowering the thunder, lightning, and squalls that ravaged the world. Beneath the pitch-black sky, above the tumultuous sea, a fiery serpent with wings ignited the chaotic world. The fishing boat was positioned between the serpent's eyes, and Atticus stood atop the vessel, surrounded by liquid flames resembling magma, which turned his eyes back to their original golden hue. He focused intently on the swirling vortex and waterspouts that threatened to engulf him, his gray hair billowing as he stared defiantly. Roar! The sound waves seemed to shatter the air, and the fiery serpent soared into the sky, unleashing a series of heart-stopping howls that illuminated the netherworld. Simultaneously, a formidable force descended without warning. The vortex's suction, like the entrance to hell, created an intense gravitational pull. In the cabin, Sirius was caught off guard, pinned to the floor by this gravity, unable to move even a finger. The lifelike scales of the serpent peeled away under the pressure, and the fierce fire ignited the raging ocean, transforming the deep, cold vortex into a fiery maelstrom resembling the gates of hell. Everything on the horizon, regardless of location, burned fiercely. Atticus was not as consumed by the desire to win as Sirius. He understood that he was still far from the person who had set up this formidable formation. The serpent, which had obscured the sun all day, finally flew into the encirclement of several waterspouts. In an instant, an indescribable pressure descended upon Atticus. The relentless gravity continuously stripped away at Atticus, condensing him into a fiendish serpent. The waterspouts, towering like pillars, were not as simple as they appeared. The strange power within them held unimaginable strength. Even the fiendish fire which had made wizards pale was easily extinguished by the waterspouts. In the white steam that filled the world, the fiery serpent was quickly stripped away, weakening visibly. The path ahead was uncertain, but Atticus knew that once the protective serpents vanished, it would spell the end for both him and Sirius. Suppressing the exhaustion in his body, Atticus roared with fury, and the diminished, fiery serpent was immediately reinvigorated. Its wings cut through the air with renewed vigor. The two surrounding waterspouts were abruptly severed in the middle, causing a massive cascade of seawater to plummet from the sky, creating a breathtaking waterfall. However, before Atticus Blaine could breathe a sigh of relief, the fallen seawater inexplicably surged back into the sky. Simultaneously, more whirlpools appeared on the path ahead, rapidly forming waterspouts that seemed poised to thwart the invaders once more, with an unstoppable force. "Atticus!" Sirius shouted, straining to lift his head slightly to witness the battle. Although this earth-shattering contest was beyond his control, it didn't mean Sirius was oblivious to the unfolding events. He clearly recognized that Atticus was on the losing side. "Stop it, Atticus. Let's find another way in. Don't throw our lives away," Sirius implored. The relentless depletion of magical energy assaulted Atticus's nerves in relentless waves. He gritted his teeth, staring intently at the path ahead, a deep sense of frustration welling up from within. Sirius was right. At this point, the only option was to retreat. Atticus panted heavily, his lips pressed into a tight line as he glared at the tireless Tianju, determined to etch this humiliate ion into his very soul. "Give up," he told himself. Just as he was about to dispel the flame snake and use the portkey to escape, he felt a sudden warmth in his chest. Instinctively, he glanced down. Amidst the apocalyptic scene, two objects emitted a strange light. To his astonishment, they slowly began to rise into the sky. End of this chapter. Chapter 428, Mysterious Reappearance. The tale Sirius shared about his escape from Azkaban had misled Atticus Blaine. Had he known that this island was connected to the owner of the central temple of Avalon and Merlin, he would not have recklessly rushed into this place. The defensive magic surrounding Azkaban is deeply intertwined with the natural environment. For millennia, it has continuously drawn magic from nature, storing it as a reserve force that seems inexhaustible. Atticus had admitted his failure and was preparing to leave with Sirius when an unexpected event occurred. Ravenclaw's diadem and Gryffindor's ancient sword. Atticus possessed 3 relics from the founding Big Four of Hogwarts. Slytherin's locket was discovered in the old Black family house. Gryffindor's ancient saber was a trophy from a trip to Avalon Island last summer, and Ravenclaw's diadem, which he had acquired long ago, was kept hidden until he handed the broken crown to Dumbledore at the end of the first half of last year. A few months ago, he retrieved the restored diadem from Dumbledore. He had a premonition that these relics might prove significant one day, but he hadn't anticipated that they would react at this moment. Under the dark sky, the exquisite diadem emitted a holy radiance, dispelling the oppressive atmosphere. Gryffindor's ancient saber was equally formidable, its tip pointed skyward, surrounded by a fierce crimson light that seemed more intense than any fire Atticus could conjure. The thick clouds vanished as if erased. The diadem and the sword appeared to command this world, using their will and strength to resist Azkaban's defensive magic. The confrontation escalated to a higher dimension, freezing the destructive celestial phenomena around them. Only the air, heavy as lead and mercury, revealed the invisible, intense tug-of-war. Even Atticus couldn't fully comprehend the confrontation, but he sensed the power was of the same energy level. Sirius, trapped in the cabin, couldn't see the source of the mutation. He silently watched the collapsing forces of nature, believing Atticus was responsible for it all. "It's incredible," Sirius shouted excitedly. "How did you do it, Atticus?" Hearing Sirius's roar, Atticus realized he was still trapped and moved to release him. But suddenly, a clear cry of an eagle and a lion's roar echoed from above. Atticus looked up in astonishment as a flawless white light descended, engulfing everything in his vision. The flames of his protective shield dissipated instantly, and Atticus, standing atop the boat, felt the world spinning. He couldn't see or feel anything. In the ensuing chaos, the basic concepts of time and space vanished, and Atticus lost his sense of Sirius's magic. He didn't know where he was or how much time had passed. All he had was the consciousness of being awake. It took him a moment to suppress the discomfort of losing control of his body and to ponder the events unfolding before him. There was no doubt that this journey was once again foreseen. Gryffindor's sword, a wand for legendary wizards like Godric Gryffindor, undoubtedly possessed extraordinary power. For thousands of years, the crown had passed through the hands of at least 3 individuals: Voldemort, Dumbledore, and Atticus Blaine. Throughout this extensive period, the crown never exhibited any special powers. Even when Atticus destroyed the diadem in that enchanted room at Hogwarts, or when Voldemort used it as a vessel for his soul, the diadem never demonstrated any ability to protect itself. However, today, as he attempted to infiltrate Azkaban, the crown and the sword shed their disguises and unveiled their magic. Previously, it was merely a suspicion, but now Atticus could finally confirm that the Big Four were guiding him, leading him to investigate the double snake staff and uncover events following the Great War that left the world in regret. The confusion persisted. It was no accident that the divination taught by the Druid ancestor priests led him into this web of mysteries. Thousands of years ago, or perhaps even longer, the intricate web of his destiny had already begun to weave. As he anticipated after his journey to Avalon Island, once he resolved to pursue these matters, he would likely encounter more remnants left by the Big Four to destroy the snake staff. Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, mentioned by Gryffindor, still lay beneath Hogwarts Castle, waiting for someone to unravel its enigma. Gryffindor himself had guided Atticus to approach the 2 snakes on the perilous island of Avalon. Atticus suddenly realized a problem he hadn't considered before. Since Gryffindor allowed him to interact with the staff of the 2 snakes in that manner, could it be that Gryffindor was unaware that the staff had a will of its own and would immediately fall out of his control once freed from the altar's seal, landing in the hands of Vatia Creona? Surely, the Big Four were aware of this. What did it mean that Gryffindor didn't intervene? Was everything unfolding according to their plan? And then there was Merlin, the wizard shrouded in an aura of deification. In this series of events, the 4 founders of Hogwarts had a strong presence. But Atticus could not ignore that the source of all these events was himself. What he did after the millennium was observed by the 4 founders of Hogwarts, and were some of the arrangements made by the Big Four before the millennium also under Merlin's control? Atticus, Atticus! A voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts, breaking into his consciousness and startling him out of his contemplation. As he regained awareness, Atticus realized that the pure white light surrounding him had vanished, and the light filtering through his closed eyelids was now normal. He could faintly hear the rhythmic rise and fall of the waves and feel the warm sea breeze caressing his cheeks. "Ugh," he groaned, struggling with his consciousness for a moment. His eyelashes fluttered a few times before he finally opened his eyes. The sunlight, though gentle, still caused discomfort, as if he had been in darkness for too long. "How are you feeling, Atticus?" a voice inquired with deep concern. It took Atticus a moment to recognize that it was Sirius speaking. Blinking, he surveyed his surroundings with a slightly blurred gaze. They were still at sea, the water a jewel-like blue, and the sky a bright azure. Not far away, a solitary island stood beneath the blue sky and white clouds. Despite the seemingly serene scene, Atticus sensed something amiss. He tried to pinpoint the issue, but as he pondered, it felt as though a dozen steel needles were piercing his head, causing unbearable pain. Finally, his eyes settled on Sirius's face. Atticus Blaine, supported by Sirius, noticed the peculiar expression on his friend's face, as if Sirius had stumbled upon something unexpected. "What happened?" Atticus inquired. "Your eyes," Sirius exclaimed, visibly taken aback. "How did they change to this color?" "Oh," Atticus replied, weakly smiling as he brushed the corners of his eyes with his fingertips. "They've always been this color." Atticus had never felt such profound weakness before. He could barely stand without Sirius's support, and found himself breathless even while speaking. In that moment, Atticus realized something else was amiss. He and Sirius were standing on the sea, yet he was certain Sirius hadn't used any magic. "I don't know what's going on," Sirius admitted, his eyes mirroring Atticus's confusion. "I woke up a few minutes before you. When I opened my eyes, I found us floating on the sea's surface. I checked. The water is real. But how are we standing on it? Why aren't we sinking?" "Yeah, why?" Atticus echoed, staring at the gently rolling waves beneath his feet. He could smell the salty tang of the sea in his nostrils and feel the cool breeze brushing against him. Everything seemed undeniably real. "Aha! Finally made it in." Just as Atticus and Sirius were trying to unravel the mystery of their situation, a familiar, exuberant laughter echoed around them. The voice, youthful yet unmistakably recognizable, sent a shiver down Atticus's spine, leaving him utterly bewildered. End of this chapter. Chapter 429. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Atticus Blaine and Sirius found themselves adrift on the vast blue sea. The horizon stretched endlessly, interrupted only by a solitary island in the distance. Suddenly, a voice emerged from the emptiness behind them, a voice that seemed etched into Atticus's very soul. "Who is it?" Sirius demanded, supporting Atticus with one hand while pointing his wand toward the source of the sound with the other. His gray eyes were filled with vigilance. The apocalyptic vision of the world collapsing that he had witnessed earlier had made Sirius acutely aware of his own vulnerability. With Atticus temporarily weakened and unable to act, Sirius dared not let his guard down. From the void, a ship began to materialize. First the bow, then the deck, the canvas, the cabin, and finally the stern, emerging slowly from the mist. The vessel appeared to have recently endured a catastrophe. Its massive hull was marred with cuts and bruises, and scorched cracks, likely from lightning strikes, were visible in many places. Atop the tall bow stood a middle-aged man with fiery red hair and a square face. His entire body, including his hair, was drenched. With one foot on the side of the boat, he gazed toward Azkaban and laughed heartily. Atticus raised his head, his eyes fixed intently on the wizard, his lips pressed tightly together. Godric Gryffindor, one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts and the first head of Gryffindor House, stood before him, his legendary presence undiminished by the passage of 1,000 years. Compared to the Gryffindor Atticus had encountered on Avalon Island, this version bore fewer sword marks on his face and appeared much younger, scarcely older than Atticus himself. Atticus's gaze drifted to Gryffindor's waist, where a sword hung. It wasn't the one from Dumbledore's office, but rather the one from Avalon Island. These details led Atticus to conclude that this Godric Gryffindor had not yet set foot on Avalon Island thousands of years ago. What was happening? Was this another trace of soul power? Atticus squinted, scrutinizing Gryffindor's face, trying to discern if the wizard's apparent excitement for adventure was genuine or feigned. Sirius, like Atticus, focused all his attention on the middle-aged wizard standing on the bow. As the ship drew closer, Sirius's wand gradually lowered, but his eyes widened, and his expression twisted in horror. I can't believe it," Sirius stammered, his body trembling violently, his face flushed. His grip on Atticus's arm tightened. "Am I dreaming, Atticus?" he finally managed to ask, shifting his disbelieving gaze to Atticus's face. "I see the same thing you do, Sirius, so you shouldn't be dreaming," Atticus replied softly, his lips pressed tightly together. Sirius exhaled sharply. "But this, how is it possible? If I'm not mistaken, he is." His voice trailed off as he stared at the middle-aged wizard's face, noting the sword at his side. A wizard in robes without a wand, yet carrying a sword. Sirius would have mocked anyone else, but he found no fault with this man. "I must be dreaming," Sirius declared, but then, as if overwhelmed, he shouted excitedly, pointing at the figure with a trembling hand. "That's Gryffindor! Godric Gryffindor!" Tears welled in the eyes of the middle-aged Sirius, and he reacted with the same awe and disbelief as when Atticus had first taught him about the legendary founders of Hogwarts. The doorway was a vision of elegance and grace. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep shade of blue, seemed to hold the mysteries of the universe. She wore robes of midnight blue, adorned with intricate bronze patterns that shimmered in the light, perfectly complementing the flag that hung beside the cabin door. Atticus Blaine, still recovering his strength, couldn't help but stare in awe. The presence of such legendary figures as Godric Gryffindor and Rowena Ravenclaw was overwhelming. He exchanged a glance with Sirius, who was equally entranced, his earlier hesitation forgotten in the face of such historical grandeur. "Rowena Ravenclaw," Sirius whispered, his voice filled with reverence. "I never imagined I'd see her in the flesh." Rowena approached Gryffindor, her movements as fluid as the sea around them. Her voice, when she spoke, was melodic and commanding. "Godric, we have indeed found the right place. The island holds secrets that could change everything." Gryffindor nodded, his expression serious yet softened by Rowena's presence. "Then we must proceed with caution. The magic here is ancient and powerful." Atticus, feeling a surge of determination, finally found his voice. "Excuse me, Godric Rowena," he began, his voice steady despite the awe he felt. "We mean no intrusion, but we find ourselves here by forces unknown to us. We seek only to understand and perhaps aid in your quest." Rowena turned her gaze to Atticus, her eyes assessing yet kind. "You are not here by accident, young wizard. The magic of this place has chosen you, and perhaps you have a role to play." Sirius, regaining his composure, stepped forward. "We are honored to be in your presence and will do whatever we can to assist." Gryffindor smiled, a gesture that seemed to light up his rugged features. "Then let us embark on this journey together. There is much to discover, and time is of the essence." As the ship sailed towards the mysterious island, Atticus and Sirius felt a sense of purpose and excitement. They were part of something greater than themselves, a journey that would test their courage and wisdom alongside two of the most legendary figures in wizarding history. In front of the two stood a figure who appeared younger than Godric, perhaps around 20 years old. Of course, these are merely assumptions, as the potent magic they wield can delay aging, making it difficult to determine their true age. Two of the legendary founders of Hogwarts were present, but it was unclear at what stage of their lives they were. Rowena's serene demeanor was as soothing as melting snow in the spring breeze. Her ice-blue eyes, set in a flawless face, seemed to hold boundless wisdom. When Atticus Blaine met her gaze, he felt as if his soul was momentarily adrift. Clad in a sky-blue vintage wizard robe, Rowena stepped gracefully from the entrance. Though she wore no other adornments, the famed crown of wisdom rested upon her head, gleaming brilliantly in the warm sunlight. Her presence exuded an ethereal grace, as if she were a goddess descended from the heavens. Sirius stumbled aside, instinctively making way for Rowena Ravenclaw as she approached Godric, despite Atticus's earlier assurance that what they witnessed was not reality. "We are humans first, then wizards, Godric. The power of magic should not be abused, or we risk losing ourselves," she cautioned. End of this chapter. Chapter 430, A Bright Future. Rowena Ravenclaw walked gracefully past Atticus Blaine and Sirius, making her way to Godric Gryffindor at the bow. Her voice was so clear that Atticus felt as if he were hearing a stream flowing unfrozen amidst the howling north wind. This was a wizard whose reason surpassed emotion. Atticus had made such a judgment. Suddenly, he noticed that Rowena Ravenclaw's ethereal aura bore a resemblance to Luna Lovegood's, with her serene demeanor and indifferent eyes, as if nothing in the world could stir her emotions. Yet, this indifference did not come across as cold. Sirius finally regained his composure and began to process the extraordinary scene before him. "What's going on, Atticus?" he whispered, as if afraid to disturb the two legendary figures. He cautiously approached Atticus. "Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, this feels like a dream, but how did they appear before us?" Atticus glanced at Sirius, then fixed his gaze on Ravenclaw's retreating figure, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "No one can give you a definitive answer, Sirius, but I have a theory," Atticus replied softly. "Clearly, the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw we see are not real. What we are witnessing is a memory. Thousands of years ago, the two founders of Hogwarts must have ventured to Azkaban. You mean, Sirius asked urgently, this memory is preserved in this sea area by some kind of magic, and anyone attempting to enter Azkaban can see it? I don't think the memory is stored in the sea, Atticus speculated. I believe it's preserved in Ravenclaw's diadem, which I now hold. The diadem sensed our attempt to breach Azkaban, activating some magic that allows us to witness this memory. Sirius was still grappling with the astonishing revelation that Atticus possessed Ravenclaw's diadem. He watched as Atticus boldly approached Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, urgently asking, "But what are they doing here?" Azkaban wasn't a wizard prison thousands of years ago. Could it be that Gryffindor and Ravenclaw established Azkaban? I'm curious about that too, Atticus murmured. What are they doing here? We can only find out by listening to them. The scenery here is quite pleasant, remarked Gryffindor, a wizard as fierce as fire and as mighty as a lion. Atticus had once encountered him on Avalon Island. His resolute eyes seemed to declare that no challenge could defeat him. Yet, in the company of his close friend Ravenclaw, one of Hogwarts' founders, his demeanor was noticeably softer. There was much to ponder. Historical records clearly state that both Salazar Slytherin and Helga Hufflepuff had direct descendants, and Rowena Ravenclaw had a daughter. However, the identity of the child's father remains unknown, and Gryffindor never married. The rumored romance between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw has been passed down through generations at Hogwarts, with countless versions. Now it seems there might be some truth to these tales. After we return, we can discuss with Salazar and Helga about relocating Hogwarts here, Gryffindor suggested. This sea area is protected by powerful magic. If the children learn magic here, no one can harm them. A wizard as formidable as Godric Gryffindor could entertain his female companion with such whimsical ideas. Ravenclaw didn't chastise Gryffindor for his absurd suggestion. Instead, she engaged with the topic. Before we set off, there was another tragic massacre in Kellid. 3 gifted children accidentally revealed their magical abilities. Once the Holy See learned of it, the executioners quickly arrived, and the 3 children were executed in front of their parents. What? Even if it was just a memory, the horror of the event was palpable. In a vivid memory, Gryffindor's fiery gaze still made Sirius, who was equally engrossed in the conversation, instinctively shrink back. Where did you hear this, Rowena? He asked. Ibo informed me, Rowena replied, her voice steady, though a trace of sadness lingered in her eyes. She mentioned that the Royal Wizarding Association has suppressed this information. The Royal Wizarding Association? Gryffindor exclaimed, his anger palpable. They've actually allied with the Holy See to harm our kind. These despicable wizarding families will do anything to prevent magic from reaching ordinary children. He waved his fist, as large as a sandbag, and declared vehemently, they must be taught a lesson, whether it's the Holy See or the Royal Wizarding Association. Gryffindor's fury was evident, as if he was ready to storm out and confront those responsible. Yet Ravenclaw remained composed. You and I both know, Godric, that force cannot eradicate the prejudice in people's hearts. But we can't just stand by and watch those children suffer, Gryffindor retorted sharply. We must take action to change this. The founding of Hogwarts is precisely our effort towards that goal, Ravenclaw replied, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the vision of a harmonious and just magical world. When the wizarding world is filled with wizards of Muggle blood, discrimination will naturally fade away. As one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, Gryffindor, celebrated by many, was not merely a man of brawn. He possessed remarkable wisdom. That will take years, Rowena, he said, blinking wearily. He was well aware of the deep-seated beliefs about blood and magical heritage. Even Salazar, despite agreeing to establish Hogwarts and teach Muggle-born children, was visibly indifferent to them. Yes, it would indeed take many years. Gradually, Atticus Blaine and Sirius became absorbed in the conversation. Even in today's wizarding world, there are still those who call for the eradication of Muggle-born wizards. Before that, we must find a way to prevent such tragedies from occurring, Gryffindor asserted with determination. I discussed this with Helga once. Rowena's smile, as she looked at Godric's righteous indignation, seemed to brighten the sky. We can't predict the magical outbursts of young wizards, but after they occur, We must be quicker than the Holy See and the Royal Wizarding Association in discovering and reaching them. I believe we can design a spell that, when a magical outburst is detected in a gifted child within this country, their information will automatically appear in a book. We can then send someone to reach the child before anyone else. The Book of Admission and the Quill of Acceptance, Sirius exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. Incredible, Rowena Ravenclaw, the wisest wizard ever. Ah, that's a brilliant idea. Gryffindor, accustomed to Rowena's brilliance, was calmer than Sirius, but still applauded her ingenuity. However, he soon frowned. But a spell that covers an entire country and runs continuously for countless years is no easy feat. A way will be found, Rowena Ravenclaw said softly. We all believe that the day will come when discrimination is eradicated from the wizarding world, don't we? Yes, it will come. Gryffindor exhaled heavily, once more gazing at the small island, now starkly visible, shrouded in gloom and darkness. But until that day arrives, we must ensure this world is not destroyed. End of this chapter. Chapter 431, Azkaban. Is the world not destroyed? Sirius froze, instinctively turning to Atticus Blaine for answers. However, he found Atticus deep in thought, his brow furrowed as if contemplating something profound. Rowena Ravenclaw, on the other hand, seemed well acquainted with what Gryffindor had mentioned. Her gaze was fixed on the lone island beneath the blue sky, her eyes clouded with a hint of melancholy. The ship beneath them suddenly surged forward, slicing through the waves as it rapidly approached the island. Atticus shook off his musings and focused his attention on the island. This place, known as Azkaban, was the most heavily fortified forbidden area in the wizarding world. While tales of its infamous guardians, the Dementors, were widespread, little was said about the island itself. Atticus, Sirius shivered, his shoulders hunched as his body trembled slightly. The increasingly vivid scene before him brought back memories of his time imprisoned with the Dementors, a fear etched into his very soul. This fear quickly eroded his courage and curiosity, even though he knew that everything before him was essentially an illusion. You can be sure that we're not in the real world right now. It's just a memory, right? Sirius asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Yes, that's basically certain, Atticus replied, noticing Sirius's unease. In an instant, he understood the reason for Sirius's silence. After a moment of thought, Atticus patted Sirius on the shoulder. If you're uncomfortable, you can stay on the boat. I'll go with these two to take a look. I suspect that once Gryffindor and Ravenclaw finish exploring Azkaban, this memory will end, and we'll be out of here. Sirius found the suggestion tempting. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze inadvertently landing on the sword at Gryffindor's waist and the rustling robes billowing in the wind. I'm going, Sirius declared, taking a deep breath. Though his body still trembled, he managed to stand tall. It's just an illusion, he panted, as if explaining to Atticus and encouraging himself. I graduated from Gryffindor House. How could I be ashamed in front of Godric Gryffindor? Besides, if James knew I was so scared of an illusion, he'd laugh his head off. Make your own decision, but don't push yourself, Atticus advised with a shrug. The boat did not dock on the reef. Instead, it halted some distance from the island, swaying gently with the waves under Gryffindor's command. Atticus, Sirius, Gryffindor, and Ravenclaw exchanged no words as they averted their eyes. As they ventured further, the world seemed to lose its color. Everything in sight, the sky, the sea, and the scorched island, was shrouded in gray and darkness. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of the wind passing through the island and the painful cries of rocks drying and cracking. The Jedi above the North Sea, where death is born and where it perishes, Gryffindor murmured, his expression grave as he surveyed the ominous Azkaban. The clues you found in the ancient books led us to Helga's prophecy, Rowena. Rowena nodded slightly, her eyes dim. Have you heard the wailing of the lives that perished on this land? Godric is a complete lunatic. I can't imagine the horror if such evil were to return to our world one day. Helga's prophecy foretold a terrible future. We came here to prevent that ending, didn't we? Gryffindor replied, gripping the hilt of his sword. His sharp gaze seemed to pierce through the gray aura emanating from the island. Rather than an island, Azkaban resembled a massive flat reef jutting from the sea. The only structure on this vast expanse was a towering fortress, its walls looming ominously against the bleak landscape. Stone Island was dominated by the imposing round tower. Over the years, the Black Tower's exterior had been polished to such a degree that it gleamed, reflecting even the faintest light. "Something's wrong," Atticus Blaine finally mustered the courage to say, lifting his head. He had endured 12 years of torment within the Tower, and the once majestic structure now held no allure for him. His sole focus was the relentless agony it inflicted upon him, a torment even a Dementor couldn't strip away. "The number of those Dementors," Atticus squinted, fighting the discomfort, and spoke hesitantly. "Do you see them, Gryffindor?" Rowena Ravenclaw interjected suddenly, causing Atticus to fall silent. "Evil creatures," the fervent Gryffindor replied with disdain. "Yes, I see them. I've never encountered anything like this before, nor have I heard of it. Let's go, Rowena. Let's see if it's what we're searching for." In an instant, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw vanished from Atticus's sight, only to reappear on the island of Azkaban. Atticus, eager not to miss any crucial information, quickly followed, pulling Sirius along as they ghosted towards the island. Dementors, now infamous in the magical world, were scarcely known thousands of years ago. The island had been untouched for centuries, and Godric Gryffindor and Rowena Ravenclaw were among the first wizards to set foot there since it lost its original owner. Dementors swam along the shore, having subsisted for centuries on the simple emotions of marine life. As the two legendary founders of Hogwarts stepped onto the island, they were momentarily entranced. 30 or 40 Dementors emitted hoarse sounds, leaving a trail of faint frost in the air. These irrational creatures were oblivious to the formidable magic they were challenging. As they closed in, Gryffindor drew his long sword skyward. The sharp clang was more startling than thunder, piercing the clouds above Azkaban and allowing golden sunlight to stream through. Gryffindor's eyes narrowed as power surged from his thunderous sword, freezing the space around them. The approaching Dementors were suspended mid-air, their tattered robes motionless. It was well known that only the Patronus charm could repel Dementors, yet Gryffindor demonstrated otherwise. On Avalon Island, Atticus had once encountered Gryffindor's Patronus, a majestic lion that had frightened him with its realism. Gryffindor was now teaching the younger wizards that common beliefs could be defied. Meanwhile, Rowena Ravenclaw displayed her own magical prowess. She raised her delicate wrist towards the Dementors, causing the air to shimmer and distort. The nearest Dementor seemed drawn towards her, slowly descending into her palm. Though towering at 10 feet, the Dementor appeared to shrink under some powerful force, its massive form dissipating into black smoke. As the malevolent energy dissipated, the Dementor's body rapidly contracted, becoming a mini version in Ravenclaw's hand. Gryffindor's gaze fixed on the diminutive Dementor, his expression growing increasingly solemn. Ravenclaw clasped her hands together, and from between her fingers, countless rays of holy light spilled forth. "Stop!" On the edge of the island, Atticus Blaine, who had just arrived, glared at Ravenclaw with a fierce intensity. Under Sirius's astonished gaze, Atticus resolutely raised his wand, his eyes burning with determination. End of this chapter. Chapter 432. The Dementors Wardens of Azkaban Prison. The dreaded Dementors are notorious for being emotionless creatures that feed on the joys and fond memories of wizards. They drain these positive emotions from a wizard's mind until the wizard's soul is hollowed out, leaving behind a body devoid of thought. Despite their terrifying nature, these monsters have no known weaknesses. While the Patronus charm can repel them, there is no way to kill them. Because of these guards in Azkaban, the Ministry of Magic has faced significant criticism, yet it is undeniable that the Dementors have indeed deterred evil. Even Sirius could see that Ravenclaw was attempting to dismantle these horrific creatures. He harbored a deep hatred for Dementors. When he realized Ravenclaw's intentions, Sirius momentarily forgot his fear of revisiting the old place. He eagerly anticipated what would happen next, but was caught off guard by a sudden outburst from his side. It was Atticus Blaine. Sirius had never seen Atticus like this before. His young and handsome features were contorted with a ferocious and fierce intent to kill. He pointed his wand at Ravenclaw and ordered her to stop. "What are you doing, Atticus?" Sirius asked, bewildered. According to Atticus's previous statements, what they were witnessing was merely a memory, something that had already happened, and they couldn't interfere. So why was Atticus so angry at Ravenclaw's attempt to destroy the Dementors? Driven almost by instinct, Atticus grimaced, subconsciously drawing his wand and pointing it at Ravenclaw's back. Sirius's scream was like thunder, jolting Atticus back to consciousness. His body trembled violently, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. "What's going on, Atticus?" Sirius's voice was full of concern, but Atticus moved his dry lips without uttering a word. He didn't know how to explain to Sirius. The feeling had been a direct reaction, driven by a throbbing in his soul. "It's nothing. Let's continue," Atticus sighed, pursing his lips tightly and saying nothing more. In Ravenclaw's palm, a new sun was brewing, and the endless radiance of the holy light began to illuminate the entire gloomy island, causing it to vibrate. This vast power, even if only a memory, made Atticus's face change slightly. The frozen Dementors in the distance, their illusory and real bodies shaking violently, seemed to be enduring endless pain. The Dementors directly exposed to the power of Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the four founders, screamed continuously in her palm. The screaming persisted. Seeing this, Gryffindor, who stood beside Ravenclaw, reached out his large, rough hand and grasped Ravenclaw's white and dexterous palm. Boom! In the void, thunder exploded. The two completely different soul powers combined like a millstone, attempting to destroy the Dementors in the most direct way. The wailing in the palm gradually weakened until it was barely audible. Gryffindor withdrew his hand, and Ravenclaw followed suit. Atticus and Sirius immediately stepped forward, and upon seeing the creature in Ravenclaw's palm, both looked displeased. The Dementor still existed. Although its form was almost transparent and as tiny as a swimming fish, it had not disappeared. "How could this be?" Sirius exclaimed. "Indeed, in common belief, creatures like Dementors cannot be destroyed, but it also depends on who is trying." Before them stood the great Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. How could they, even with their combined efforts, fail to eliminate an ordinary Dementor? A strange light flickered in Atticus's eyes, and he felt incredulous. As they stood in shock, Gryffindor, undeterred by his previous failure, prepared to try again. The air buzzed with energy as a majestic lion, its eyes gleaming like rubies and its mane ablaze with flames, leaped from the void. It faced the little Dementor in Ravenclaw's palm and roared with fury. Like an eager young wizard, Sirius let out an excited scream, while Atticus Blaine, who had encountered this Patronus before, squinted in anticipation of what was to come. As close friends, Atticus and Sirius shared an unspoken understanding. Rowena gently waved her hand, and the tormented little Dementor floated towards Godric's Patronus. The lion opened its blood-red maw and swallowed the creature whole. "This time, there will be no problem," Sirius declared confidently. The Patronus, seemingly alive, growled menacingly, a mysterious magic brewing within its closed mouth. Yet after a moment of silence, Rowena watched as the lion spat out a transparent ghost, no larger than a little finger. Its voice, once ethereal, now carried a weighty tone. "See, Godric," Rowena began, "it can't be destroyed. The Patronus can indeed obliterate it, but the essence isn't about soul power. It's about happiness and these pitiful creatures." Her ice-blue eyes reflected a hint of concern. The issue lay not in strength, but in joy. Atticus's brow furrowed in thought, but what he heard next shattered his composure. "Hellbow." Gryffindor's voice was tinged with melancholy. "This man created Horcruxes, ensnaring wizards of his era with the promise of immortality. They were manipulated, repeatedly splitting their souls, ultimately becoming these ghostly shells caught between life and death." A thunderous realization struck Atticus, altering his expression dramatically. Could it be that a Dementor was once a wizard? Wizards who sought immortality through Horcruxes, only to become empty shells from excessive soul division? Sirius, too, wore a puzzled look. Though unfamiliar with Horcruxes, he understood Gryffindor's implication that a Dementor had severed its own soul. In modern times, Voldemort was the only wizard Atticus knew who had fragmented his soul multiple times, a magic that had long troubled Dumbledore. Voldemort likely took pride in his Horcruxes, yet neither he nor Dumbledore foresaw that the ultimate fate of a split soul could be this. Atticus's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. It made perfect sense, didn't it? Horcruxes strip away the good in a person's soul, leaving only the evil. If even that evil is eventually stripped away, what remains? Dementors. Dementors, feeding on emotions, instinctively seek to fill their void. Tragic. Ravenclaw's voice was filled with compassion. These wizards fell into a trap. They likely believed Hirebow gifted them Horcrux magic as a reward, but they were merely pawns. Hirebow needed them to become these indestructible shells. Atticus, his mind in turmoil, clung to this revelation. He knew Gryffindor or Ravenclaw must have preserved this memory for a reason, offering crucial guidance, yet he struggled to grasp the full picture. These sorrowful creatures must be destroyed, Gryffindor stated with resolve. Ravenclaw nodded slightly. Race, this is the most crucial step. Sirius glanced between Atticus's pale face and the determined expressions of Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. He opened his mouth several times, unsure of what to ask. The mysteries were overwhelming, yet Sirius understood that he had stumbled upon significant secrets, and Atticus's determination to be here was undoubtedly linked to these revelations. Chapter 4 and 33. In-depth Dementors are wizards who have split their souls multiple times. But what is the limit? From Voldemort's perspective, the information Atticus Blaine has gathered includes Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, and the diary. Harry is an invisible Horcrux, a fact known only to Dumbledore and himself. Even Voldemort is unaware that he accidentally created a Horcrux. That's 5 in total. Based on Atticus's understanding of Horcrux magic and soul knowledge, it seems impossible for Voldemort to create multiple Horcruxes without consequence. At a certain point, the depletion of one's soul could lead to madness. Judging by Voldemort's behavior, he hasn't reached that point yet. However, when the soul division approaches a certain limit, will the wizards still have the ability to actively split their soul? The intensity in Atticus's eyes faded slightly as he pondered deeply. It seems unlikely. The difficulty of casting Horcrux spells is significant. Atticus has witnessed firsthand the torment endured by a wizard who failed to achieve eternal life through Horcruxes. If, as Gryffindor and Ravenclaw suggest, a Dementor is a wizard who has split their soul too many times, then too many might mean at least a dozen times. Even a powerful wizard like Voldemort couldn't achieve this, and historically, there haven't been many wizards comparable to him. The answer is clear. These unfortunate souls were likely manipulated by the creator of Horcruxes, the origin of all conspiracies, the despicable Hirebow, who forced them to split their souls. The magic of the blood curse is a testament to Hirebow's expertise in soul magic. Many questions were answered after the 2 founders of Hogwarts revealed the truth about Dementors, but new questions arose. Sirius felt as if he had returned to his naive student days. Among those present, he was the most uninformed. He blinked expectantly at Atticus, hoping for an explanation, but Atticus merely shook his head slightly. "Look," Atticus began. After confirming that Dementors couldn't be destroyed by force, Gryffindor withdrew his suppression of the surrounding Dementors. The freed Dementors didn't attempt to attack the 2 founders of Hogwarts again. Instead, they emitted strange chirping noises and fled, proving one thing. These creatures are afraid, even if their fear is instinctual rather than emotional. Gryffindor casually sheathed his sword and clapped his hands, unconcerned. However, Ravenclaw's ice-blue eyes gleamed with understanding. "We've finally confirmed something." Gryffindor, ever the optimist, showed no worry, despite knowing the formidable opponent they faced. Ravenclaw pursed her lips, gently touching the diadem of wisdom on her head. An inexplicable force emanated from the shining crown, absorbing and sealing the destroyed Dementor. "I'll take it back to study with Helga and Salazar," she said, her gaze shifting to a distant point on the island. "Let's go over there, Godric. I sense something." Ravenclaw and Gryffindor's figures vanished instantly. "That place!" Sirius, the most familiar with Azkaban among the 4, was about to follow Atticus when he noticed the small windows on the tower's outer wall. His face turned pale, and he suddenly shouted, "Remember what I told you? The stone pillar you care about is in the ruins in that direction." "Let's go and see," Atticus urged. They found themselves amidst vast ruins. Atticus Blaine, who had descended from the sky, surveyed the scene and quickly deduced that the temple at the center of Avalon Island had been relocated from this very place. The moment he had glimpsed the towering structure on the island, Atticus had an inkling. The architectural styles were identical. "When I was in Azkaban, this area was submerged underwater. Only during certain times of the year, when the sea recedes, do the ruins become visible, Sirius explained to Atticus after scanning the surroundings. Atticus nodded, his eyes lingering on a tall, rugged stone pillar. It was reminiscent of the monoliths that formed Stonehenge. "It's a seal," Ravenclaw stated, standing beneath the towering stone pillar. She placed her palm against it, feeling its surface with a calm demeanor. "I can sense that this stone pillar is not solitary. There is something with the same primordial power located far away." Gryffindor, who had been circling the pillar, paused upon hearing Ravenclaw's words. He tapped the stone with his fingers, intrigued. "So it seems Merlin is the one who left it behind?" "That seems likely," Ravenclaw concurred. Merlin. The name hung in the air as Sirius glanced at Atticus, who remained composed despite the revelation. Sirius felt overwhelmed, as if he had stumbled upon secrets he was never meant to uncover. "I can open it, Godric," Ravenclaw said, glancing at Gryffindor, whose hand rested on his sword's hilt. "I'm just uncertain if I should." "We've been led here, Rowena," Gryffindor replied in a deep voice. "He must know what we're about to do." Ravenclaw nodded in agreement, saying nothing more. With a soft hum, the crown of wisdom lifted from Ravenclaw's head, hovering above the stone pillar. A beam of white light emanated from the crown, bathing the ancient stone in a crystalline glow. As the light intensified, a star curtain appeared on the pillar, its speed increasing until it dazzled the onlookers. The stars moved faster, causing the massive stone pillar to tremble, and even the island quaked slightly. "What is this?" Sirius asked, frowning. "A magic rune node," Atticus replied, his face paling. Despite his extensive knowledge and expertise in alchemy, he had never encountered a magical item with as many nodes as this stone pillar. The complexity was unparalleled, and the fact that Rowena Ravenclaw could decipher it at a glance was astounding. She truly deserved her reputation as the most intelligent wizard. "The Dementors are gathering again," Sirius suddenly exclaimed, breaking Atticus's admiration for Ravenclaw's brilliance. Indeed, the Dementors, previously driven away by Gryffindor, were now encircling them once more. They hovered at a distance, emitting faint signals of unease, yet none dared approach under Gryffindor's fierce gaze. "It seems there are significant secrets hidden beneath the seal, ones that interest the Dementors," Atticus murmured softly. Boom! The stone pillar erupted with light, and the star curtain vanished. Under Ravenclaw's guidance, the pillar, its rough surface restored, began to ascend slowly. As it rose, the island's tremors intensified, and the black reef beneath their feet cracked open, hinting at an ominous force eager to be unleashed. Before them, a dark, bottomless chasm appeared, like the gaping maw of hell, exuding an unsettling aura. A chilling aura of darkness and death permeated the air. Even Gryffindor, known for his bravery, narrowed his eyes slightly as the ominous presence brushed against him. "What a dreadful sensation," he muttered, his voice tinged with anger. "How many lives have been lost beneath us?" "Prepare yourselves," Atticus Blaine cautioned before leaping into the abyss. "We are likely to witness something unimaginably brutal." "The horrors I've just witnessed are enough to haunt me for the rest of my life," Sirius remarked, his demeanor as unflinching as a pig unfazed by boiling water. End of this chapter. Chapter 434, The Lair. As the world's leading wizards, there were few things that could instill fear in Godric Gryffindor and Rowena Ravenclaw, especially when they stood together. Faced with a chasm that resembled the gaping maw of hell, they leaped in without hesitation, resolutely descending into the abyss. Atticus Blaine and Sirius, who were observing from the memory world, followed suit, unburdened by fear, and plunged into the depths. The passage twisted and turned, leading them far underground. The air was damp and carried a faint, salty tang reminiscent of seawater. Although they were merely experiencing a memory, the sensations were vivid, perhaps because they were reliving what Ravenclaw and Gryffindor had once felt. The descent lasted about 2 minutes, unimpeded, as they hurtled downward like meteors streaking through the sky. The air grew warmer as they descended, though it would not take them to the Earth's core. The passage ended in a gentle curve, slowing their descent. Gryffindor landed gracefully and extended a strong hand to help Ravenclaw to her feet. They found themselves in an unremarkable stone chamber, yet Atticus could discern from the carvings on the walls the era in which the structure had been built. A corridor ahead glowed with a reddish light, likely magical in nature, but the oppressive heat suggested its true source. "Madman," Gryffindor exclaimed, surveying their surroundings. He built his lair in a magma lake, surrounded by countless magical shields. Without guidance, we would never have found this place. Ravenclaw adjusted her crown, her icy blue eyes piercing the walls to uncover hidden secrets. "The concentration of magic here is immense, far surpassing that of Hogwarts," she observed calmly. "It's an ideal place for anyone seeking to break through the final barrier." Break through the final barrier? Atticus's eyes narrowed in surprise as he glanced at Ravenclaw, then surveyed the room with renewed interest. If he were truly present, he might have discovered more, but this was merely a memory, a snapshot he could not fully explore. He resolved to remember Ravenclaw's words. "Come, Godric," Ravenclaw urged. "There's something here I must see with my own eyes." She did not linger in the stone chamber and moved on. The corridor was eerily silent, its atmosphere foreboding. Sirius felt uneasy and instinctively clutched Atticus's robe. "What's wrong?" Atticus asked, sensing the tug. "Nothing," Sirius replied, releasing his grip and shaking his head. Yet, after a pause, he couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you scared? I know we're watching a memory, Atticus, but—" Sirius frowned, his gaze fixed on the narrow, red-tinged passage. After a moment's thought, Atticus understood what Sirius was trying to convey. He smiled enigmatically. "You mean the environment here? Well, how should I put it? Many magical relics from ancient Greece have this style. A few years ago, before I returned to Hogwarts to teach, I explored some tombs. The relics were all like this." Sirius, slightly taken aback, watched Atticus's back with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Wasn't it just grave robbing? Indeed, as Atticus had anticipated, the ruins buried deep beneath Azkaban Island were not fundamentally different. Atticus Blaine found himself in a place unlike any he had explored before. He and his companions walked along a long, winding corridor, passing numerous rooms identical to the initial stone chamber. These rooms were shrouded in darkness, making it impossible to discern their contents. Pausing briefly, Atticus realized there was nothing particularly special about them. Some areas of the tunnel bore clear signs of protective magic, though these had been destroyed. It wasn't hard to guess who was responsible. As they continued, the red light in the corridor intensified. Although Gryffindor and Ravenclaw appeared unfazed and moved swiftly, sweat trickled down their foreheads. Sirius, overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere, remained silent, while Atticus was lost in thought. He pondered the sorcerer who divided his soul, Horcruxes, Dementors, and the true identity of the phantom lurking within Morgan Le Fay on Avalon Island. Over the past year, Atticus had speculated much, so when Gryffindor mentioned the name of the vile Hellbow, Atticus was not surprised. However, there were subtleties in the exchanges between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor that warranted further reflection. Suddenly, a faint rumbling echoed from the corridor ahead, prompting Gryffindor and Ravenclaw to quicken their pace toward the light. Atticus, Sirius, anticipating what lay ahead, struggled to speak, managing only to call out, "Madness!" Atticus shook his head, offering no further comment. As they emerged from the corridor, a world bathed in red light unfolded before them. Momentarily blinded, they squinted until their eyes adjusted. The sight left Atticus and Sirius speechless, and even the two founders of Hogwarts breathed more heavily. They stood in a vast cave, far larger than the one housing the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, concealing the door that could not be opened. Everything glowed with a blinding red hue, and the air shimmered with intense heat. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw cast spells to shield themselves from the oppressive temperature. Beyond the door lay a small, flat stone platform, bordered by a cliff. Sirius was the first to approach the edge, peering down as if he had seen a ghost. 2 miles below, terrifying pillars of fire erupted from a churning lake of magma, their explosive roar reminiscent of a fire dragon. Despite the spectacular display of fireworks in the sky, no one could find joy in the scene. The extreme heat continuously melted the rocks along the magma lake's shore, creating a vast space with a narrow opening and a wide base. How is this possible? Is this truly the work of a wizard? Sirius trembled, his face pale. Merlin had suspended Avalon Island in the sky, while Hellbow had carved a massive pit in his lair to draw up the magma. Atticus shook his head, bewildered by the ancient wizard's mindset. "The concentration of magic here is indeed astonishing, Rowena," Gryffindor remarked, fanning the scorching air with his large, calloused hand. "This abnormal concentration of magic comes from the magma lake below. It seems we must descend." "Descend? Are you serious?" Gryffindor's grave words nearly sent Sirius reeling into the lava lake. He stared at the bubbling lava with trepidation. It's certain death. Atticus was also taken aback, but Atticus Blaine was much calmer than Sirius. "Don't worry, there must be a way," he reassured. Atticus was quite familiar with the routines of these kinds of ruins. Although he couldn't perceive the magic directly, he was certain that the vast cave before them was filled with powerful forbidden magic. Since Gryffindor had mentioned descending into the magma to leave, there had to be a specific, correct path to follow. Attempting to force their way through with sheer strength would likely provoke the fiery pillars erupting from the magma lake below, and they would be anything but gentle. Chapter 435, The Most Evil Wizard in History. Magic follows rules. If Gryffindor and Ravenclaw attempt to directly penetrate the magma lake below by disregarding these rules with sheer force, all the remaining defensive magic within this magical relic might immediately go haywire. At that point, the entire island of Azkaban could be capsized into the sea. Ravenclaw remained silent, her icy blue eyes flickering with light as she surveyed the entire cave. "Have you discovered anything, Rowena?" Godric Gryffindor asked. Deciphering secrets was not his forte. After a few glances around the cave, he abandoned his search and placed his hopes on Ravenclaw. Both Atticus Blaine and Sirius turned their attention to Ravenclaw. They were confident she would find the path to the boiling lava lake, but they were curious about her method. As Atticus observed the profile of this powerful and beautiful legendary witch, his eyebrows twitched slightly. Since joining the two founders of Hogwarts, Atticus had been so overwhelmed with secrets that he hadn't had the energy to examine the crown worn by the legendary witch. To outsiders, Ravenclaw's crown might seem like a famous cultural relic with historical value. However, none of the relics left by the Big Four were simple. For instance, when Ravenclaw was deep in thought, the crown of wisdom she wore emitted a consistent crystal light, clearly providing her with some assistance. After a long pause, a smile graced Ravenclaw's lips. "I recall something Salazar once mentioned to me." "Oh, what was that?" Gryffindor inquired, his interest piqued. Contrary to later rumors, the relationship between Gryffindor and Slytherin wasn't as strained. Mentioning Salazar, Slytherin didn't discuss Gryffindor. Instead, he was genuinely curious. "Salazar once told me that the earliest recorded Parselmouth in history was the despicable Herpo the Foul himself." "You mean," Gryffindor raised an eyebrow, "I should have dragged him out of that dark basement." Atticus's eyebrows twitched at this revelation, and he suddenly thought of the method to open the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. "It's okay," Ravenclaw said with a smile, blinking her eyelashes. "I once asked Salazar for guidance and recorded some Parseltongue." "Harry is a Parselmouth too, right?" Sirius, who had been silent, suddenly asked. After receiving confirmation, he muttered a few words under his breath. Parseltongue is a strange, eerie, and obscure language, but Ravenclaw's whisper had an ethereal quality. Initially, the sound was faint and barely audible, but after 10 seconds, the hissing sound overpowered the roaring magma lake below, carrying a sacred solemnity. With a resounding crash, the tumultuous magma sea split into two spectacular magma waterfalls. The blazing light from the boiling magma was so intense that it seemed like staring directly at the sun. In the blinding light, a staircase emerged, extending towards the edge of the cliff. Ugh! With just one glance, Sirius's face turned pale, and the overwhelming dizziness made his body appear transparent and misty. The intense stimulation seemed to trigger signs of awakening in his mind, making him want to leave this memory world. Atticus patted Sirius on the shoulder, though his own expression was equally grim. Herpo the Foul, the only dark wizard with a notorious reputation in ancient Greece, was an exceptionally talented wizard. Besides Horcruxes and blood curses, in the current magical world, people still attribute extremely powerful and evil dark magic, lacking a clear origin, to Herpo. This alone speaks volumes about his infamy. Imagine the countless lives taken by this man during his active years. Atticus Blaine's face was filled with anger as he drew his sword, his powerful presence pushing back the oppressive heat. He was ready to strike, but Ravenclaw intervened suddenly. "Stop it, Godric," Ravenclaw said, shaking his head slightly at the furious Gryffindor. The stairs before them were not made of stone, nor did they use any expensive building materials. Instead, they descended straight into the magma, consisting of hundreds of steps, each 10 feet wide, constructed entirely from pairs of severed palms. These lifelike fingers, retaining moisture even under the intense heat of the lava, were not the hands of wizards, but the palms of house elves. On either side of each staircase floated a head, the head of a house elf. These severed heads still bore the humble smiles they had in life, their mouths pursed, and their heads slightly bowed, as if in eternal servitude to the master of these ruins. Hale Burr had used the hands of house elves as steps and their heads as handrails. How contemptuous was this fellow of life! House elves were still active in the wizarding world, mostly serving pure-blood wizarding families, with many working in the Hogwarts kitchens. These little beings took pride in serving wizards, believing it to be their life's purpose. This distorted belief was ingrained in their very souls, and leading wizards to regard them as property rather than living beings. Yet, Atticus was certain that even in today's magical world, those pure-blood wizard families, steeped in meanness and prejudice, would struggle to remain calm upon witnessing this scene. Creature. Under Atticus's comforting presence, Sirius finally seemed to regain some composure, though he still covered his mouth. What would Creature say if he saw this? Sirius murmured softly, his breath slightly labored. Then, shaking his head, he added, Creature would probably see this as the highest honor. He dreams of having his own head severed after death and hung next to my mother's portrait. Atticus's eyes were stern. House elves were not magical creatures unfamiliar to him, but he had never truly paid them much attention. This tragic scene before him was a wake-up call. It was absurd, wasn't it? Consider goblins, centaurs, werewolves, vampires, leprechauns, vila, and even goblins. How could a sentient race hold such an extreme concept of survival, viewing servitude to wizards as the ultimate purpose in life? Helga's probably going to go crazy when she sees this, Atticus thought. If they dismantled the steps, they wouldn't be able to delve deeper into the magma. Gryffindor could only suppress his murderous intent, angrily sheathing his sword. He thought of his other good-hearted friend, sighed, and shook his head. Helga has been trying to lift the cruel curse on these little creatures, and if she saw their suffering, she would likely be driven mad with anger. The wizarding world of 1,000 years later was relatively more relaxed, yet even so, the treatment of house elves remained appalling. It was conceivable that in the closed wizarding society of millennia past, glory and blood were the prevailing norms. What a life that man had led. Among their 4 closest friends, Helga was the gentlest and kindest, the only one who truly cared for such humble, poor creatures. Elves have been serving wizards since the dawn of wizarding society. To this day, almost no one has sought to uncover the origins of house elves. Now, it seems they were likely created here, born into slavery. End of this chapter. Chapter 436, The Despicable High Urbo. For Atticus Blaine, the name High Urbo was just another entry in the annals of magical history. Although there were records of him in the restricted section of Hogwarts, and numerous books on dark magic bore his name on their title pages, what significance could a dark wizard who perished 2,000 years ago hold? However, as Atticus delved into the memories of the 2 founders of Hogwarts, he realized how gravely mistaken he had been. The concept of Horcruxes, splitting the soul to achieve immortality, was bewildering to Atticus. Could a soul truly be divided? Gryffindor's explanation left him unsettled, especially the revelation that Dementors were the remnants of wizards who had excessively fragmented their souls. Rowena Ravenclaw's assertion that house elves were possibly created by High Urbo to forge a race of magical intelligent beings was equally disturbing. Atticus could scarcely fathom the extent of High Urbo's power, which seemed to transcend life itself. Atticus? They finally stepped onto a ladder, with house elves forming its base. Traversing such a path was a humbling experience, and they avoided looking at the sides of the ladder, where even in death, the elves maintained their subservient expressions. With a somber face, Atticus suddenly spoke. "You've been pursuing High Urbo, haven't you?" Atticus was momentarily taken aback by the question. After a long pause, he nodded slightly. "But could it be?" Atticus began to ask urgently, but the memory of the conversation between the two founders of Hogwarts interrupted him, leaving him horrified. "Is this guy still alive?" "I suppose so," Atticus replied blankly, his mood visibly darkened. "Alive for 2,000 years?" Atticus's voice was strained with disbelief. "And when we entered, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor mentioned Merlin. What happened?" This time, Atticus offered no response. His gaze was fixed on the churning magma, as if he had discovered something significant. "All right," Atticus muttered, realizing that Atticus was unwilling to answer. He fell silent, though within moments he couldn't help but murmur, "Considering the situation here, Voldemort seems less threatening." Indeed, there were remnants floating in the magma, bones of creatures whose flesh had been incinerated. Most were unrecognizable, but Atticus identified one as belonging to a fire dragon. The remains were thicker and more formidable than any he had seen before, likely belonging to the ancestor of fire dragons. High Urbo seemed to use this magma lake as a refuse incinerator. Despite being submerged in magma for over 10 centuries, the remains were remarkably preserved, hinting at the creature's formidable nature when alive. They descended to the magma's level, separated only by a thin magical shield. As the magma flowed, the bones of creatures that resisted melting struck the barrier with fiery waves. Despite knowing they were safe, the oppressive atmosphere was palpable. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw exchanged no words as they advanced, finally arriving at a dark door beneath the lava lake 10 minutes later. The door was a massive black stone slab, adorned with giant pythons coiling and twisting across its surface. The serpents' eyes were lifelike, their gaping mouths revealing chilling fangs. "The basilisk," Atticus murmured softly. Without hesitation, he knew how to open the door. With a hiss, Ravenclaw spoke in Parseltongue, and Atticus's eyes flickered as he carefully noted the incantation. A strange hum resonated through the air. Amidst the heavy rumbling, the darkness before Atticus Blaine's eyes swiftly consumed the dazzling glow of the magma. A door stood as a barrier between two worlds. The room they found themselves in resembled the entrance hall before the Hogwarts auditorium. Despite its towering, shadowy presence, the room lacked any trace of heat. Instead, the humid air carried a chill, reminiscent of memories from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, making Atticus and Sirius feel as though they were in a familiar place. "There are Dementors here," Sirius exclaimed. His years of imprisonment in Azkaban had left deep scars. The moment he sensed the familiar chill, he instinctively recoiled, shivering uncontrollably, and even considered transforming into his animagus form. Clang! As they all stepped into the foyer, the door closed automatically behind them. The only illumination came from the faint starlight emanating from the dome above. Opposite them stood another tall stone door, its cracks and those in the ground exhaling wisps of white, silky, cold smoke. Gazing at the gate, a realization dawned upon them. They had likely reached the core of this underground ruin. As they approached, the door opened of its own accord, revealing a room that rivaled the grandeur of the Temple Hall on Avalon Island. Gryffindor raised his sword for the third time since arriving on the island, but once again, Ravenclaw intervened. "It doesn't make sense, Godric," Ravenclaw said, her beautiful face shadowed with wariness. "We've tried, and we can't destroy this creature." "What on earth is this?" Sirius asked, bewilderment clouding his eyes as he stared at the hall, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. Atticus sighed deeply, his expression grave. "This is likely the processing workshop of the Dementors." In the vast hall, from the stone gate they had entered to the far side beyond their sight, every few steps revealed a beautiful white halo floating a few feet above the ground. It resembled a dizzying nebula suspended in a cold, lonely universe. While nebulae give birth to stars, within the halos before them lay incomplete silhouettes of human figures. Gryffindor's hand brushed over the halos, causing scattered light particles to float in the dark air like playful stars. "Is this the spiritual power that the creatures in the nearby sea have been deprived of?" Gryffindor asked heavily. Upon receiving confirmation from Ravenclaw, he shook his head and sighed. "A beautiful heart has become a breeding ground for evil. High Urbo must be stopped from descending, or all magical civilizations and the Muggle world will face catastrophe. Ravenclaw seemed to perceive a deeper connection. She too sighed. These psychic powers come from the Dementors we encountered above. They kill life, and the power they absorb is channeled here, giving birth to more of their kind. Sirius looked pale. Thousands of Dementor embryos filled the hall. If all these Dementors were to be born, it would spell disaster for the magical world. As they ventured further inside, the broken souls within the halos began to resemble the Dementors they knew. By the time they reached the innermost part, the black shadows within the halos were already moving within their eggshells. They sensed the presence of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw and eagerly struck at the hotbed that nurtured them. Ravenclaw halted before an embryo on the verge of maturity. Her icy blue eyes continued to analyze the root of the Dementor, but as her observation deepened, her expression grew increasingly grim. Helbo, he has cultivated these colorless souls into indestructible creatures. In this manner, they ultimately formed a malevolent and unique group of beings. Ravenclaw shifted his focus to Gryffindor and said, "For us, it is imperative to eliminate every member of this group. If even one remains, we will have failed." End of this chapter. Atticus Blaine stood in the hall where the Dementors were cultivated, gazing at the room. The space was filled with gorgeous, nebula-like halos, reminiscent of a boundless dark universe. Ever since meeting the enigmatic Vicia Creona, a series of revelations had flowed through his mind. These discoveries were like pieces of a puzzle, gradually forming a complete story in Atticus's mind. This magnificent tapestry was nearing completion, yet the most crucial piece was missing. Why did all these secrets revolve around him? By solving this puzzle, Atticus could uncover most of the truth behind the entire affair. "When I was imprisoned in Azkaban, there weren't as many Dementors on the island as we see now," Atticus remarked calmly, his expression indifferent. In March of this year, the official records from the Ministry of Magic listed the number of Dementors as 160. 10 years ago, it was 150. The ministry still hasn't figured out how Dementors reproduce. Academics believe they rely on self-splitting, assuming that when a Dementor absorbs enough happy memories, it gains the ability to reproduce. The scene before him provided the answer to the mystery of Dementor reproduction. Sirius blinked, contemplating the increase in Dementor numbers that Atticus had just mentioned. More than 10 years ago, after Voldemort's downfall, many Death Eaters and their followers were imprisoned in Azkaban. The surge in prisoners likely ensured the Dementors never went hungry, accelerating their reproduction, Atticus explained, as if reading Sirius's thoughts. In this secret realm, numerous unexplored rooms awaited. Ravenclaw and Gryffindor had led them to the core, and the room they occupied was undoubtedly the heart of the secret realm. However, they noticed a small door on the right side of the room, ajar and leading to another chamber. "Come on, Rowena," Gryffindor said, his heart heavy. He gestured to Ravenclaw and turned toward the small door. Atticus and Sirius followed, sensing that the memory they were experiencing was drawing to a close. Beyond the door lay a short passage, flanked by solid rock walls. At the end of the passage stood a broken door, its damage clearly not from natural weathering, but from deliberate demolition. For centuries, the two founders of Hogwarts were likely the only wizards to have entered this secret place. Apart from them, perhaps only the legendary White Wizard had ventured here. They entered the room beyond the door, and as Atticus stepped inside, his eyes, which had been dull for so long, sparkled with newfound interest. Rowena Ravenclaw shared his expression. The room was spacious, with wooden shelves lining the walls. A small portion of the shelves held ancient books, most of them parchment manuscripts. "Helbo's collection of books?" Ravenclaw exclaimed, her spirits lifted for the first time since arriving on the island. She hurried over, reaching out to pick up a magic book stained with dark blood. But as her green fingertips touched the book, it crumbled into sand, leaving only a wisp of smoke around her fingers. Merlin destroyed the defensive magic inside when he entered this library. These books have been left in an unprotected environment for hundreds of years. The books had suffered significant damage. Seeing his friend deflated, Gryffindor flashed a mischievous, gloating smile, while Sirius gave a reassuring pat on Atticus Blaine's shoulder, whose face darkened once more. In addition to the bookshelves lining the four walls, the library was filled with rows of books, seemingly untouched for ages. Ravenclaw did not attempt to pick up any of these volumes. Her gaze pierced through the shelves, suddenly freezing in a particular direction. With renewed purpose, she navigated around the obstructing bookshelf and headed towards her destination. At the center of the library stood a desk, its material clearly not wood but rather the skeletal remains of some creature. By now, they were no longer surprised by Hirebow's cruelty. Ravenclaw approached the desk, her eyes falling on a stack of manuscripts scattered across its surface. The text on the front page was written in ancient runes, a language both Ravenclaw and Atticus were proficient in, making it relatively easy for them to decipher. "What does it say?" Sirius asked, stretching his neck to peer at the strange symbols, though he understood only a few of the more common runes. "It seems to be about magic, or perhaps a ritual. I'm not sure yet. Let me see." Ravenclaw, cautious after their recent lesson, refrained from turning to the second page. However, she had a method to access the subsequent content. "Hallows," Ravenclaw suddenly uttered, catching Atticus off guard as he tried to glimpse what she was reading. "Saint artifact?" Gryffindor frowned, sifting through his extensive knowledge of magic and alchemy, but found nothing. "Is it like Horcruxes, some kind of dark magic? Hallows? Deathly Hallows?" Atticus mused, furrowing his brow. It wasn't as if he had never heard of such things. "It's the opposite of Horcruxes." "You're right, Godric. This is indeed a very dark and dangerous magic," Ravenclaw said seriously. "The fact that this notebook is still here is significant. Once we return, I must dedicate some time to researching it." "Hallows. My father mentioned them to Regulus and me when he was alive," Sirius interjected, blinking in confusion. "It originated from the story of the three brothers in the Tales of Beetle the Bard. But Gryffindor and Ravenclaw are much older than Beetle, right?" "Hallows," Sirius suddenly exclaimed. "The legend of the three brothers. The god of death in it shouldn't be referring to Hirebow. Stories and reality often diverge, but currently the sacred artifact and Hirebow are closely linked. Moreover, the sacred artifact likely exists," Atticus said thoughtfully, his eyes flickering with contemplation. After a few more minutes, Ravenclaw seemed to have committed the entire stack of parchment to memory. She looked around at the surrounding bookshelves, regret evident in her eyes. If only she had more time, she could transcribe all the books and manuscripts in this library. Unfortunately, time was not on their side. "Come on, Godric. Let's head to the room at the back of the library. That's the last stone room." End of this chapter. Chapter 438. The Door. The legend of the Deathly Hallows is not a widely circulated tale, yet it is far from being a secret. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, a renowned fairy tale book in the wizarding world, was something Atticus Blaine had encountered during his studies at Hogwarts. Although he wasn't particularly interested in the stories themselves, he read them to deepen his understanding of the wizarding world. The legend of the three brothers did not captivate him at first. It seemed just another tale among many similar ones. However, years later, while on a commission in Germany, he discovered that this story held significant popularity in that region. The Elder Wand, known for its immense magical power, the Invisibility Cloak, which could hide one from the sight of even the divine, and the Resurrection Stone, said to bring the dead back to life. Many still sought these three artifacts. Atticus understood why people were drawn to them. Yet, despite knowing the rumored origins of the Deathly Hallows and their potential truth, Atticus chose not to pursue them. Perhaps it was because the pursuit of such powerful alchemical items differed from his own magical philosophy. To him, the value of the Deathly Hallows paled in comparison to a book that could deeply analyze the evolution of spell formations. The fact that these artifacts appeared during the era of High Erbo and were shown to him in memories by Ravenclaw and Gryffindor intrigued him. Atticus took a deep look at the manuscript on the table before following the two founders into the final room. As they entered the last chamber, Sirius exclaimed in surprise. They found themselves not in a traditional room, but seemingly transported into a boundless starry sky. The ground beneath them was not solid bricks and stones, but an unfathomable void. Atticus gazed upward, captivated by the dreamlike galaxy in the distance. He narrowed his eyes, observing the fleeting bright stars, and mused. This starry sky doesn't look fake. What do you mean, Atticus? Sirius asked eagerly. You mean we've been teleported into the universe? No, Atticus replied thoughtfully. What I mean is that this house seems to reflect the real starry sky outside. The directions and trajectories of the stars are accurate. But why did High Urbo create this? What's the purpose? The place indeed resembled the real outer space. Special magic allowed them to walk into the sky. Ravenclaw soon discovered this and began to move upward and to the right. What did you find, Rowena? Gryffindor asked, clearly puzzled, but he followed her immediately. The bright galaxy was light years away, yet nearby there was only cold darkness. This place mirrored the real universe. Without a reference point, Atticus felt as if he were standing still, even after walking for a long time. The darkness around him remained unchanged. If the path they walked was not an illusion, then the real space of this house had been expanded to an unimaginable level. There's something there, Sirius exclaimed, breaking the monotony of the oppressive darkness. The cold, boundless universe weighed heavily on their souls, almost maddening after a while. Sirius had been trying to suppress his anxiety, searching for something tangible in the eternal scar of darkness. When he spotted an object reflecting starlight in the distance, he cried out excitedly. Atticus, weary from the seemingly endless journey, quickly focused his gaze on the object Sirius had pointed out and let out a long sigh of relief. Standing alone in the void was an altar. Atticus Blaine, after a quick survey, confirmed that this altar was identical in style to the one dedicated to the snake staff in the central temple of Avalon Island. Aside from the altar, there was nothing else of note. What truly captured everyone's curiosity was the object standing upon it, a door. More precisely, it was an arch. The arch appeared to be carved from a single massive stone, its surface rough and ancient, devoid of any seams. Tattered curtains hung from the archway, and despite the absence of wind, they floated eerily, as if held aloft by invisible hands. An inexplicable chill settled in the hearts of all present, even Gryffindor, who was usually confident and reckless. As he ascended the stone steps, caution was evident on his face. Gryffindor stood before the door, frowning as he gazed solemnly at it. His eyes peered through the empty doorway, but the distant galaxy was obscured. A strong aura of death permeated the space within the arch, rendering it black. After a moment's contemplation, Gryffindor drew his sword, slowly extending its tip toward the darkness. "Don't do that, Godric," Ravenclaw interjected suddenly, "unless you want to lose your sword." Surprisingly, the usually impulsive Gryffindor heeded Ravenclaw's advice and withdrew his saber. "Very interesting feeling, Rowena," he mused. "Nothing else makes me feel this way, as if facing death," Ravenclaw finished softly, standing beside Gryffindor. She stared into the darkness, completing his thought. "Ah, death!" Gryffindor's eyes shifted from vigilance to intrigue. "Death is a wonderful adventure to look forward to." "This door gives me a bad feeling," Sirius said, hesitating on the stone steps, unwilling to take the final step. He regarded the stone door with a grim expression. Atticus nodded, understanding Sirius's apprehension. Since it was a door, it should lead somewhere. But where? "This door is very unusual. There should be records, Rowena. Have you read anything about it in your books?" Atticus asked. Ravenclaw shook her head and stepped forward, gently brushing aside the floating curtain with her slender wrist, revealing the door to everyone. Only then did they notice 3 shallow dents on the door's lintel. Each dent was irregular in shape, varying in size and depth. "This is..." Gryffindor leaned in closer, squinting to examine them. "They're coordinates," Ravenclaw explained calmly, as if she had already pieced it together. "Clearly, only when the coordinates are found and placed within these dents will the door truly open, granting us access to the world beyond." "What if we just forced our way in?" Sirius inquired, and Atticus was the only one who could answer. "It's hard to say," Atticus replied, his gaze never leaving the arch. "According to Ravenclaw, this is a door. You can think of it as a key. Without the coordinates, if you accidentally enter the world beyond, there's a high chance you'll be exiled into the void. It could be cold and lifeless, or a realm filled with spatial turbulence. It's full of uncertainties. In short, if you fall into it by accident, you might not survive." Sirius shuddered and retreated from the stone steps, resolving to avoid such things in the future. "I'm going to take this door back," Rowena Ravenclaw suddenly declared, her words shocking everyone. She turned to Gryffindor, her eyes filled with determination. "I have a feeling that this door is as vital to our mission as defeating the malevolent creature on the island. Since we can't eliminate the creature just yet, we must ensure that this door remains secure from those creatures until we can destroy them." End of chapter. Chapter 439, The End of Memory. Gryffindor did not stop Ravenclaw from taking the ominous-looking arch. They retraced their steps, passing the library and the hall where the Dementors were bred. They navigated the eerie path formed by the palms and heads of domestic elves, eventually returning to the upper levels. By the time they emerged from the original stone chamber back onto the island, the sky over Azkaban had darkened. The Dementors hovered anxiously, wary of the massive stone pillar still suspended in midair, never daring to approach it. Even though they knew there was no real danger in the world of memories, Sirius felt a wave of relief wash over him as he stepped onto the scorched earth once more. Perhaps it was the recent experiences that had shattered his worldview, but Sirius had finally managed to overcome some of his fears. He gazed at the gloomy yet imposing stone tower, standing against the dark sky with a mix of emotions. This cold, spiraling tower had imprisoned what might have been the most significant 10 years of his life, a choice he had made himself. Just half a year ago, he was convinced he would never regret that decision. But now, seeing the tower again, Sirius was filled with complexity. What had changed his perspective was not the harsh reality, but the beauty and simplicity of life. He had come to know the exceptionally talented young wizard beside him, rekindled his friendship with Remus, and rediscovered innocence. During his months at Hogwarts, he met many pure-hearted young wizards. Most importantly, he had finally begun to fulfill some of the responsibilities he should have taken on. Sirius no longer wanted to dwell on whether his past decision was right or wrong. He simply wanted to preserve the happiness he had now. "I was thinking about something, Godric." Neither Ravenclaw nor Gryffindor seemed interested in the towering spiral tower. After a quick glance, neither mentioned entering it. Standing beneath the tall, rough stone pillar, Ravenclaw looked up at the faintly visible magical nodes and suddenly spoke. "To hatch those embryos below, these creatures have been depleting life in the nearby sea. But soon they will not be satisfied. To hatch more companions, they will leave this sea and enter human society. These creatures have lost their sense of kindness. Without the ability to discern evil or restrain themselves, a catastrophe will inevitably occur. Godric, muggles will be defenseless, and even wizards lack the means to sanction them." This was indeed a likely scenario unless they could eliminate all the Dementors before they spiraled out of control. But that was precisely the challenge. Gryffindor pondered for a moment, surveying the island. "The island is surrounded by the magic hirebow left to repel outsiders. We can do the same, Rowena, and implement measures to prevent these creatures from escaping the island. General means are ineffective against them. Only the direct suppression of soul power can keep them confined here. If we die, these measures will become void." "How do you propose we do that?" Gryffindor asked, frowning. It was a difficult question, and Ravenclaw didn't have an immediate answer. "I need to think. After returning to Hogwarts, I will study these creatures further. Although Hirebow's intention in creating them wasn't to torture and slaughter, we must ensure they remain under control." With a resounding boom, the stone pillar slowly descended, sealing the deep hole in the ground once more. Ravenclaw touched the stone pillar with her fingertips, speaking thoughtfully. "I can sense a similar magical wave on the mainland. Leave it to me next time," Gryffindor replied, determination in his voice. Atticus Blaine brushed back his fiery red hair, tousled by the sea breeze, and said with enthusiasm, "To be honest, Rowena, taking risks with you isn't as thrilling as I'd hoped. You always manage to figure things out, and it takes away the challenge." Rowena Ravenclaw's ice-blue eyes glanced at Godric Gryffindor, a hint of dissatisfaction in her gaze. "I hope you can see the reality, Godric. We're not just taking risks. Ever since Helga sensed those visions and made her predictions, everything we do is to prevent the world from descending into eternal darkness." Suddenly, an ethereal birdsong pierced the gloomy and oppressive surroundings. The darkness around them quickly dissipated. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw stood beneath the stone pillars, still conversing, but their voices became distant and dreamlike, fading away. "What's happening, Atticus?" Sirius exclaimed in panic as Azkaban disintegrated before his eyes. "As we anticipated, we've always existed within the memories of Ravenclaw or Gryffindor. Now, this memory has reached its end, and it's time for us to return," Atticus replied, watching the two founders of Hogwarts transform into bright silver threads and gradually disappear. His expression was complex, and his voice was faint in Sirius's ears. Sirius wanted to ask more, but a sudden thunderclap exploded, plunging him into darkness, as if he were sinking into the deep sea, overwhelmed by suffocation and fear. He struggled desperately, and then, "Ah!" With a start, Sirius sat up abruptly from the deck, knocking aside the door panel that had been pressing on him. The unexpected impact momentarily darkened his vision, and he nearly fainted again. After a moment, he clutched his red and swollen forehead, pushed away the bent hatch panel from his leg with difficulty, and staggered to his feet. Above him, the stars shone gracefully and softly. The sea was calm, and a few seabirds perched on the broken mast, tilting their heads and curiously observing the bewildered Sirius. It took him a moment to grasp the situation. He turned to look at Atticus, who had awakened a few steps earlier on the ship's side, and noticed that he was gazing into the distance. Following his line of sight, Sirius saw the only island beneath the cloud, reflected under the pure, starry sky. "Are we in?" Sirius asked instinctively. Atticus turned around, and only then did Sirius notice that he was holding something in his hand, Ravenclaw's diadem and Gryffindor's sword. Sirius widened his eyes, staring at the two legendary artifacts glistening under the starlight, holding his breath unconsciously. "These are from memory," Atticus said, his voice calm. Sirius's breathing gradually steadied, and he smiled freely. "I bet, Atticus, if people find out you have these, you'll never know peace again." "Not many wizards are capable of taking them from me," Atticus replied with a slight smile. A seabird resting on the mast flapped its wings and flew to Atticus' hand, gently pecking at his fingers, its dark eyes pleading for food. Atticus moved his finger, and several small fish leaped from the scale-like waves to the ship's side with a splash. The seabirds sang cheerfully, scrambling for the feast. "I'll keep what I saw a secret, Atticus," Sirius suddenly spoke, watching the seabirds flapping their wings and competing fiercely. Atticus raised his brows, meeting Sirius's serious gaze. With a smile, Atticus looked away, tapping the side of the ship lightly as he gazed in the direction of Azkaban. His eyes wandered. "No, I want you to say," Atticus Blaine continued before Sirius could question him in astonishment. His voice was calm, and his deep eyes seemed to pierce through space and time, as if glimpsing visions of the future. "But not now, in the future. If one day I suddenly disappear and you urgently need to find me, then please tell Dumbledore what you saw." End of this chapter. Chapter 440. In the gentle embrace of the sea breeze, Atticus Blaine's calm words sent a shiver down Sirius's spine. "What do you mean, Atticus?" Sirius asked, realizing he had posed this question to Atticus countless times that night. He quickly dismissed the thought, focusing instead on the gravity of the situation. "Suddenly disappearing, what exactly are you planning?" Atticus didn't respond directly. Instead, he offered a slight smile and turned his gaze back to Azkaban. Sirius, observing Atticus's demeanor, understood that further questioning would be futile. He studied Atticus's profile. The young man, barely in his 20s, bore an expression of determination and depth that belied his age. His eyes held a complexity that Sirius couldn't decipher. "You're remarkable, Atticus," Sirius sighed, patting him on the shoulder. "I can't think of any wizard your age with such formidable magic, not even Dumbledore. But remember, this is the lesson from my 12 years in Azkaban. I, Remus, Dumbledore, and even Snape, we're all your friends. Even Voldemort has his Death Eaters. If you need help, understand that we're here for you." The soft starlight bathed Atticus, softening the contours of his face. "I don't need a lecture, Sirius," Atticus quipped, steering the conversation away. He interrupted Sirius's next words. "I'm going to Azkaban. That place has affected you too much, so wait here for me." "You're still going?" Sirius frowned. "Didn't the memories we just experienced answer your questions?" You want to explore the underground ruins, but how do you plan to enter? Ravenclaw's diadem is in your possession. With Sirius watching anxiously, Atticus ascended into the sky until he vanished from sight. The wait felt interminable. For hours, Sirius stood on the weathered deck, his eyes fixed on Azkaban, but the silence was as deep as an abyss. Atticus's prowess was undeniable. If he were exploring elsewhere, Sirius wouldn't be as concerned. However, after delving into the memories of the Hogwarts giants, Sirius understood that Azkaban was far more perilous than it seemed. As the starlight faded and the morning sun began to rise, a shadow skimming the sea's surface approached swiftly, bringing Sirius a wave of relief. "Did you encounter any trouble?" he asked as the shadow transformed back into Atticus on the deck. Sirius scrutinized Atticus, relieved to find no signs of harm. But when he looked into Atticus's eyes, he paused. "Your eyes. Back to their original color?" Atticus seemed in high spirits, touching the corner of his eyes with a smile. "All is well." Sirius didn't press Atticus about whether he had accessed the underground realm with Ravenclaw's diadem or what he had done in those hours. Instead, he shrugged and said, "It's over, right? Does this mean we can go back? Oh, Harry must be waiting for me to take him to the Quidditch World Cup. How about it, Atticus? Want to join us? Let's pick up Harry first. Remus is probably getting impatient at the old house, and he and Creature don't get along. We plan to stay with the Weasleys for a few days and then take the kids to the Quidditch World Cup." Sirius looked at Atticus eagerly, hoping for a positive response. However, Atticus slowly shook his head. "I don't enjoy overly noisy places. For the rest of the summer vacation, if there. It's no accident that I'll probably stay in the old house. I need time to reflect on the memories we shared." It took Atticus Blaine and Sirius over 20 days to reach this sea area. Fortunately, the return journey wouldn't be as complicated. They could use the portkey to transport to Old John's house, and from there, Atticus could take Sirius back to London. Their current location was within the magical boundaries guarding Azkaban. The powerful enchantments here rendered all teleportation magic ineffective. Atticus used his magic to control the decaying ship, which was incapable of moving on its own, and slowly guided it out of the sea area. Just as he anticipated, although breaking through the barrier again caused some disturbance, it was nothing compared to the chaos when they first entered. It was merely a mild breeze and a drizzle in comparison. Once they were completely free of Azkaban, the last trace of gloom vanished from Sirius's brow. He lay on the side of the ship, enjoying the pleasant sea breeze, while waiting for Atticus to retrieve the portkey from the cabin. Suddenly, a snow owl, circling high above, swooped down, creating a sharp silhouette in the sky. Before Sirius realized the bird was heading towards him, the snow owl had already landed in front of him, its wings flapping against his cheeks. "Oh, don't!" Sirius staggered back a few steps, frowning at the snow owl, which looked quite battered and was glaring at him angrily, as if ready to pounce and peck him fiercely. After a moment, he exclaimed, "Come on, Atticus! It's Harry's owl. I think it's called Hemingway." "It's Hedwig," Atticus corrected, emerging from the cabin with the portkey, shaking his head slightly. "What did I say?" Sirius replied, looking rather pleased with himself. "Harry must be getting impatient at the Muggle's house. He can't wait for me to pick him up. Oh, and this owl is so clever to have found us here." For Sirius, the greatest joy was being needed by Harry. He comforted Hedwig repeatedly, and when he received the letter, he eagerly opened it in front of Atticus. As he read the slightly immature handwriting, Sirius's joyful expression gradually faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Perhaps you should read this letter, Atticus." Atticus, who had been feeding Hedwig small fish from the sea, noticed the change in Sirius's demeanor. "What happened?" he asked, taking the letter without hesitation and reading it quickly. "What do you think, Atticus?" Sirius inquired softly, observing Atticus' expression. "Harry's scar isn't just any scar, right? Harry mentioned that the last time it hurt was when Voldemort was near him. It should be impossible for Voldemort to appear near the Muggle family where Harry is staying, right? Dumbledore's magic protects him. He can't find Harry, can he?" "Harry probably hasn't told us everything," Atticus replied, narrowing his eyes slightly as he studied the carefully written words. He recalled a conversation with Dumbledore before their departure, and couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. Not long after Dumbledore's warning, something strange had indeed occurred with Harry. Putting down the letter, Atticus said calmly, "Harry's scar is indeed unusual. It signifies a secret connection between him and the wizard who gave him this scar. It must be treated with caution. I'll accompany you to Privet Drive to ask Harry face to face if there's anything else he hasn't mentioned. I also suggest you write a letter to Dumbledore and inform him." Just then, another gray owl arrived, interrupting their conversation. From a distance, an owl flew directly toward the ship. Much like Hedwig, this owl had ruffled feathers, suggesting it had been struggling in this sea area for several days. The letter it carried was addressed to Atticus Blaine and was penned by Cacus Foley. "Sorry, Sirius," Atticus murmured as he opened the letter and quickly scanned its contents. His eyes suddenly sharpened with focus. "Regarding Harry's situation, you'll need to investigate on your own. If there are any new developments, write to me immediately. There's something I must personally look into." End of this chapter.